The mud holds you without any hurry, a cold and patient grip that reaches just above your ankles. You have been standing here long enough that your feet have made their own small hollows in the earth, and the water that gathered there has warmed slightly against your skin before cooling again. The rain stopped some time ago, though you cannot say exactly when, because the grey sky still hangs low and heavy, and the light has not changed in what feels like hours. You are one of many, a single figure in a long line of archers that stretches across this open field in northern France, and the quiet is so complete that your own breathing seems like the loudest sound for several paces in every direction. Your bow stands upright beside you, taller than you are by half a hand, its lower tip pressed firmly into the soft ground. The yew wood is damp now from the mist that never truly lifted, and tiny beads of moisture cling to the waxed string, catching what little light remains in the overcast sky. You keep one hand resting lightly on the upper limb, not to support the bow so much as to feel its presence, the way a man might rest his palm on a door frame when waiting for something he cannot hurry. The string pulls gently against the inside of your left forearm where you keep it braced, a constant dull pressure that you have long since stopped noticing as anything other than a part of standing still. Ahead of you, the field runs flat for a long way before rising just enough to hide the bottom of the distant wood. The grass there is beaten down and mixed with mud, churned by thousands of feet that passed this way before the order came to stop. There is no green left in it, only browns and greys that blend into the earth itself, so that the whole world seems made of one muted color. You let your gaze travel slowly along the line of men to your left and right, seeing each one as a shape more than a face. All of you wrapped in the same heavy wool, all of you with bows planted like thin, bare trees in winter. No one speaks much. The few words that pass from time to time are low and brief, a murmur about the wet or the cold or the weight, spoken without the expectation of an answer. The tunic you wear is wool, thick and undyed, the color of sheep that have wandered through mud themselves. It hangs heavy on your shoulders, absorbing the damp from the air even without rain, and you can feel its weight pulling at the back of your neck. Underneath is a padded gambeson, many layers of linen stitched together in vertical rows, and you are aware of the way the fabric presses against your chest with each slow breath. The sleeves are loose enough to let you draw a bow, but now they hang still, the cuffs dark with moisture where your wrists emerge. At your waist, a simple leather belt holds a pouch and a small knife that you have not needed to touch for hours, and the sheath of it rests against your hip, with the familiar, steady pressure that you sometimes forget is there. Your legs are covered in woolen hose, cut from the same bolts of cloth as your tunic, and they cling to your calves and thighs, soaked through below the knee where the mud has reached. The cold of the ground seeps upward through the soles of your town shoes, thin leather that offers little more than a barrier between your skin and the wet soil. You can feel the shape of small stones and the broken stems of grass under the balls of your feet when you shift your weight, a shift that happens only very slowly, almost without thought, as your body adjusts to the demands of standing without moving. The mud makes a soft sucking sound when you do this, a sound that is absorbed immediately by the damp air and lost among the countless other small noises of the waiting army. The grey sky above you is one unbroken sheet, lighter near the horizon where the day is slowly fading toward dusk, but otherwise without texture or change. You have watched it for so long that you can see the gradual darkening as a kind of tide, so gradual that any single moment looks exactly like the moment before. Only when you close your eyes for a slow count of 20, and then open them again, do you notice that the light has dimmed by a fraction, that the outlines of the men around you have grown slightly less distinct. There is no sunset to mark the end of the day, only this soft, steady descent into a deeper grey, as if the whole sky is sinking closer to the earth. Your breathing settles into rhythm that matches the stillness, a long and even pull of air through your nose, the slight lift of your chest under the gambeson, and then a slow release that you can feel as a faint warmth against your upper lip. The air itself smells of wet soil and wool, and the distant clean scent of the woods that border the field on two sides. There is also the faint metallic tang of old iron from the stakes that some of the men have already begun to sharpen, but that is a smell that comes and goes on the faintest stirring of breeze, never strong enough to be called unpleasant, just another layer in the quiet scent of a damp autumn evening. You notice the weight of the bow again, not as a burden, but as a fact. Something that is part of you, the way your own arm is part of you. The stave is smooth where your hand has worn it over many months of practice. The waxed string still tight and true, despite the damp. The horn knocks at each tip, a pail against the dark hue, and a single drop of water hangs from the upper nock, catching a pinprick of grey light that has no source you can name. You watch that drop for a long time without any particular expectation, knowing that eventually it will fall or be absorbed into the air, and when it finally slips free and vanishes into the mud, the event is so small and quiet that you are not even sure you saw it happen. Around you, the army is settling into the wait with the same patient stillness. To your left, a man whose name you cannot recall is checking the fletching on his arrows for the third time since you stopped marching, running his thumb along the goose feathers with a slow, absent-minded motion. To your right, another man has closed his eyes and seemed to be sleeping where he stands, his head tilted slightly forward, his bow cradled in the crook of his arm. Further down the line, someone coughs once, a dry sound that does not carry, and then silence returns as if the air itself has smoothed over the interruption. You can hear the soft rustle of a banner in the hands of a standard-bearer somewhere behind you, the cloth not snapping, but merely shifting its weight, a sound like a large bird adjusting its wings in its sleep. Your own body feels heavy now, not with fatigue exactly, but with a deep, calm stillness that has settled into your bones. The cold is no longer a shock, but a companion, something you have accepted as completely as the ground under your feet. Your hands are chilled, and you tuck the left one inside the fold of your tunic, feeling the rough wool against your fingers and the slight warmth of your own body trapped there. Your right hand remains on the bow, the fingertips resting against the smooth hue, and you can feel the faint grain of the wood like the texture of a familiar story told many times. The light continues to fade in increments so small that you cannot measure them, the sky deepening from ash to slate, from slate to a soft woolen darkness that seems to gather in the folds of your tunic and in the hollows of the ground. The distant wood is now only a black outline against a slightly lighter black, and the shapes of the men to your left and right have become almost indistinguishable from each other. You hear the first tentative sounds of the night, the soft wicker from the horse lines far to the rear, the clink of a cookpot being lifted and set down, the low murmur of conversation that is less about words and more about the simple reassurance of human voices in the dark. You let your eyes close halfway, not sleeping, but resting your gaze in a soft, unfocused middle distance that takes in nothing in particular. The pull of the bowstring against your forearm is a steady, rhythmic companion to your pulse, and you become aware of your own heartbeat as a faint, distant thump that you feel more in your temples than in your chest. The mud around your feet has cooled again, and you make another small adjustment of your weight, leaning slightly more onto your left leg, feeling the mud yield and then settle into a new shape around your ankle. Time moves differently when there is nothing to mark it, no bell or horn or changing of the guard to break the hours into pieces. You have no idea how long you have stood here, only that it has been a long time and that it will probably be a long time still. This thought does not trouble you. It is simply a fact, like the damp, or the cold, or the weight of the bow. You let it pass through your mind without holding on to it, and your attention returns to the immediate world. The sound of your breath, the feel of wool on your skin, the slow, peaceful darkening of the sky above the French field where you wait. The man to your left has stopped checking his arrows and now stands as still as you, his bow planted, his head tilted slightly back, as if he is looking at the same patch of formless sky that you are. You do not speak to him, and he does not speak to you, but there is a quiet understanding in the shared stillness, a knowledge that you are both here for the same reason, and that the reason itself can wait. The entire line of archers is like this, a long, patient hedge of men and you and quiet breathing, stretching across the muddy field into the gathering dark. A single drop of water falls from somewhere, perhaps from the tip of your bow or from a fold in your tunic, and you hear it land in the mud with a small, soft sound that is immediately lost. The air is so still now that sounds travel strangely, some of them muffled and close, others faint and far away, as if the whole world has been wrapped in a damp blanket. You can hear a dog barking in a distant village, a sound so thin and far that it might be a memory, and then it stops, and there is only the quiet again. You think about the bowstring, about the wax that protects it from the damp, and you remember the small lump of beeswax in the pouch at your belt. At some point, you will need to run it over the string again, working it into the linen fibers with your thumb, but not now. Now is for standing still, for letting the night come at its own pace. You can feel the wax there in the pouch, a solid shape among the other small things you carry, and knowing it is there is enough. The cold has crept into your fingers more insistently now, so you bring your right hand down from the bow and cup both hands together in front of you, blowing a slow, warm breath into the hollow they make. The warmth is brief but pleasant, and you repeat the motion once, twice, and then let your hands fall back to your sides. The bow stays upright on its own, the lower tip wedged just enough into the mud to hold it steady, and you know that if you needed to, you could leave it there and it would wait for you as patiently as you were waiting for the morning. Behind you, somewhere in the larger mass of the army, you hear the soft sound of a man humming a tune that you almost recognize, a melody that your mother might have hummed when you were small. Something about the turning of seasons or the falling of rain. The sound is so quiet that you are not sure you are really hearing it, and it fades after a few notes, leaving only the memory of its shape in the air. You do not try to hum along, but the feeling of the tune stays with you, a gentle thread of something familiar woven into the unfamiliar dark. Your eyelids feel heavy now, and you let them close fully for a moment. Just a moment, trusting your feet to keep you upright and your bow to stay where it is. The darkness behind your eyelids is not complete, but a soft, reddish grey, and you can still sense the faint outline of the world through your other senses, the smell of the mud, the sound of the army breathing, the pressure of the ground under your feet. When you open your eyes again, the sky has deepened to a color that is almost black, and the first pale hint of mist is beginning to rise from the wet ground, curling around your ankles like slow, silent breath. You watch the mist as it forms, a thin layer of white that hugs the lowest parts of the field and moves only when the faintest stirring of air pushes it one way or another. It does not rise high, only to your knees, and it makes the ground look insubstantial, as if you are all standing on a cloud that has settled here for the night. The lower tip of your bow disappears into it, and you can no longer see the exact place where wood meets earth. The mist is cool against your shins, cooler than the mud, and it brings with it a new kind of dampness that settles on the outer layer of your hose and begins its slow work of seeping inward. You become aware of a deep, quiet ache in your lower back, the kind that comes from standing for a long time without changing position, and you respond to it by straightening your spine just slightly, feeling the small bones in your back realign with a series of tiny, soundless movements. The weight of your tunic shifts, the gambeson resettles, and you let your shoulders drop away from your ears without having realized they had crept up. The new posture feels better for a moment, and then it too becomes part of the long, slow wait indistinguishable from the rest of the night. No one gives any orders. No horns blow, no captains move among the lines. The army is simply here, paused in the dark, a great collection of quiet souls spread across the wet ground. You can feel the presence of thousands of men around you, even if you cannot see them. A vast, silent pressure that is not threatening, but merely enormous, like the weight of the sky or the depth of the ocean. You are a small part of it, a single bowman in the mud, and there is a kind of peace in that smallness. The man who was sleeping has woken, or perhaps he was never truly asleep because he shifts his weight and you hear the squelch of mud as he resettles his feet. He says something under his breath, a single word that might be a name or a prayer, and then he is still again. You do not know him, have never spoken to him, but you feel a faint kinship with him in this shared night of waiting, the way two ships anchored near each other might feel the same tide. You look up at the sky once more and notice that the clouds have thinned, just barely, in one patch directly overhead. Through that thinner place, you can see the pale blur of a single star. Or perhaps it is not a star but just a brighter spot of grey, a trick of your tired eyes. You watch it anyway, letting it anchor your gaze while your breathing continues its slow, steady rhythm. The star, if it is a star, does not move or twinkle. It simply is there, a quiet point of light in the great dark bowl of the night. Your breathing and the breathing of the army seem to fall into a kind of shared time, a long and even cadence that has no conductor. Inhale, pause, exhale, pause. You can feel your own breath now as a small cloud of mist in front of your lips, visible only when you exhale slowly enough, and you watch it appear and disappear, appear and disappear. A gentle ghost that lives for only a moment before returning to the air. The ache in your feet has become a sort of warmth now, a steady, dull heat that comes from the long pressure of standing. You flex your toes inside your turn shoes, feeling the mud squish between them, and the sensation is almost pleasant in its familiarity. You have known this feeling before, on other nights before other fields, and you know that it will pass when it is time to move again, and that until then it is simply another part of the waiting. Somewhere far off, an owl calls, a low and hollow sound that drifts across the field like a boat on a dark river. The call is not answered, and after a long silence, it comes again, just once more, and then the night swallows it. You listen to the place where the sound was, holding your own breath for a moment to hear better, but there is nothing else. The owl has spoken its piece and is gone. You think of the arrows in your sheath, the 24 smooth shafts bound with leather, and you think of the iron heads that you sharpened 2 days ago on a stone near the campfire. They are still sharp, you know, because you have not used them, and they rest against your hip with a faint metallic weight that is different from the weight of the bow. In the morning, when the light returns, you will need to check them again, to run your thumb along each edge and make sure the damp has not begun its slow work of rust. But that is a task for another time, a time that is not now, and you let the thought drift away as easily as it came. The mist has thickened while you were not paying attention, rising now to your waist, and the men to your left and right has become shapes cut off at the middle, floating torsos and planted bows emerging from a white sea. It is beautiful, in a quiet, somber way, the kind of beauty that asks nothing of you, that simply exists and invites you to witness it. You witness it now, letting your eyes move slowly along the line of half-visible men, each one a small island of stillness in the fog. Your right hand finds the bow again, not because you need to, but because the wood is a familiar anchor in a world of shifting mist and dim light. Your fingers trace the curve of the upper limb, finding the small nick in the yew that you put there yourself years ago when you were still learning, a mistake that the bowyer said would not harm the bow if you kept it waxed. You have kept it waxed, and the nick is still there, smooth now from years of your thumb rubbing over it, a small imperfection that has become a landmark. The night deepens into its middle hours, the time when the cold seems to come from inside your own bones rather than from the air, and you draw your tunic tighter around you with a slow, careful motion. The wool resists at first, stiff with damp, and then it yields, and you feel a small pocket of warmer air trapped against your chest. You hold it there, not moving, letting the warmth spread as far as it can before the cold takes it back. You are not waiting for anything in particular anymore. You are simply here, on this field, in this mud, under this sky, and the waiting itself has become the entire world. There is no future and no past, only the slow, steady rhythm of your breath, the weight of your bow, the texture of wool, and the quiet company of the men around you. The night will pass as all nights do, but for now it is still and deep and full, and you are part of it, as patient and as quiet as the earth itself. The first pale hint of morning does not arrive so much as it slowly replaces the darkness, like water seeping into a dry cloth. You have been standing long enough that the transition feels less like an event, and more like a gradual shift in the quality of the air around you, and you notice it first, not with your eyes, but with your skin. A faint change in the temperature, that means the sun is somewhere below the edge of the world, working its way upward. The mist that rose during the night still clings to the lowest parts of the field, but it has thinned just enough that you can now see the ground directly beneath you. The small circle of mud and flattened grass that has been your entire world for hours. You look out across the field, not because there is anything to see, but because looking is something to do. A way of measuring the slow return of shape and distance to a landscape that darkness had erased. The ground in front of you slopes gently downward for about 200 paces before it levels out into a broad, flat strip of open land that runs between 2 stands of trees. The slope is so gradual that you would not notice it if you were walking, but standing still as you are, you can feel it in the slight forward pressure on your ankles, the way your weight wants to settle just a little more toward the balls of your feet than toward your heels. It is the kind of slope that water remembers, a soft, almost invisible tilt that has guided centuries of rain toward the lower ground where it now sits in dark, still pools. The mud directly around your feet has been shaped by your own presence into a series of small ridges and hollows. The marks of your heels and the sides of your turnshoes, preserved in the wet earth like the signature of a long, patient night. You can see where the water has seeped into these depressions, filling them with a thin brown liquid that reflects the grey sky so perfectly that the puddles look like holes punched through the earth into another deeper greyness. The surface of each puddle is absolutely still, unbroken by wind or rain, and as you watch, a single tiny insect crosses the nearest one, its legs dimpling the water without breaking the surface tension, leaving behind a trail of small expanding rings that fade before they reach the muddy shore. Beyond your immediate patch of ground, the field spreads out in a pattern of furrows and ridges that were cut by the plough many months ago, before the armies came, before the grass was trampled into the soil. The furrows run in long, parallel lines from your left to your right, dark stripes of turned earth alternating with lighter strips of the remaining stubble, and you follow them with your eyes as they travel across the field and disappear into the mist near the tree line. The pattern is simple and regular, the kind of pattern that a man might make when he walks behind an ox with his hands on the plough handles and his mind on something far away, and seeing it now gives you a quiet sense of order in a world that has otherwise been reduced to mud and waiting. Clumps of wet grass rise at irregular intervals from the churned ground, small islands of vegetation that have survived the passage of thousands of feet by being just slightly higher or just slightly firmer than the earth around them. Each clump is a dark, olive-brown color, the blades bent and matted down by the rain that fell the day before, and they glisten faintly in the growing light as if they have been painted with a thin wash of oil. You notice that some of the clumps have been cut cleanly, sliced through by the edge of a cartwheel or a heavy boot, and the cut ends are pale green and white, the color of living grass that has not yet accepted the autumn. To your left, about 40 paces away, a single larger puddle has formed in a natural dip of the ground, a shallow pool perhaps 10 paces across that catches the light of the brightening sky and holds it like a mirror made of brown glass. The water there is deeper than the water in your own footprints, deep enough that the bottom is invisible, and you can see the reflection of the clouds moving slowly across its surface, even though the clouds themselves are not moving at all. It is a trick of the changing light, the way the grey tones shift and blend, and you watch it for a long moment without trying to understand it, simply accepting the slow drift of reflected clouds as part of the same quiet magic that has held you here all night. The two woods that border the field sit on either side of the open ground, dark masses of trees that in this light are more like shapes cut from black paper than living stands of oak and ash. The wood on the left is closer to you, its edge defined by a line of older, larger trees whose branches spread out wide and low, their leaves still clinging in patches of dull brown and muted gold. Between the trunks you can see only darkness, a deep, layered shadow that the daylight has not yet penetrated, and the darkness seems almost solid, a wall of quiet that runs parallel to your own line of archers. The wood on the right is further away, perhaps 3 times the distance, and from here it looks smaller and denser, a thicket of younger trees that have grown up close together, their tops forming a single uneven ridge against the grey sky. The space between the two woods is the open ground where the field levels out, and it is this space that your eyes keep returning to, not because anything moves there, but because it is the only break in the landscape, the only place where the earth seems to lead somewhere. The ground in that middle stretch is darker than the slope where you stand, wetter and softer, and you can see patches of standing water that have no grass at all, just smooth, brown mud that glistens like wet leather. This is the lowest part of the field, the place where all the rain drains and sits, and it has the look of ground that would pull a man's boots off if he tried to cross it quickly. But no one is crossing it. It simply lies there, empty and still. A flat, brown page, waiting for something that has not yet been written. The clouds above you have begun to show their own shapes now, breaking from the single grey sheet of yesterday into distinct layers and forms, some of them darker and heavier, others thin and almost white where the hidden sun touches them. The highest layer is a pale, watery grey that seems to glow from within, and beneath it are lower clouds that drift in the same direction as the morning breeze, a direction you feel on your left cheek as a faint cool pressure that comes and goes. The clouds move slowly, with the kind of deliberate, unhurried motion that matches your own breathing, and you follow one particular cloud with your gaze as it crosses the field, its shadow passing over the mud, over the puddles, over the distant wood, and then gone. Your shadow has begun to appear now, stretching out to your right and slightly behind you, a long, thin shape that lies across the furrows and the grass clumps, as if it has been painted there with a wide grey brush. The shadow moves when you move, but you are moving so little that it seems fixed, a permanent part of the landscape, another mark on the earth, like the furrows and the puddles. You can see the outline of your own head and shoulders, the shape of your bow standing upright beside you, and the two shadows, yours and the bow's, joined together at the base where the lower tip meets the mud, making a single dark form that is both you and not you. The light itself is grey and diffuse, the kind of light that comes through a high overcast on an autumn morning when the sun is up but hidden, and it falls on everything with an equal, shadowless quality that softens edges and blends colours. The brown of the mud is not one brown but many, ranging from the deep, wet darkness of the puddles to the lighter, drier brown of the higher ground near your feet. And all of these browns shift and change as the light shifts, never quite the same from one moment to the next. The green of the distant woods is a muted olive green, the grey of the sky is a layered grey, and the whole world seems painted in the quietest colours of the earth. You notice now the shape of the land to your right, where the field rises slightly before it meets the wood, a gentle swell that might once have been a field edge or a boundary between two holdings. The grass there is thicker and less trampled, and you can see the faint line of an old ditch, now mostly filled in with silt and dead leaves, that runs along the base of the rise. Water has collected in the ditch in a long, narrow line, reflecting the sky in a broken ribbon of grey that winds through the grass and disappears into the shadows under the trees. The ditch is the kind of feature that a farmer might dig over the course of a winter, a slow, patient labour that has no urgency and no drama, and it sits there now as part of the landscape, useful and forgotten. To your left, beyond the nearer wood, the land opens up again into a wider view of the countryside, a patchwork of fields and hedgerows that fades into a soft, misty distance where the horizon is more of an idea than a line. You can see the dark, compact shapes of a few scattered farm buildings, their roofs steep and thatched, and the faint smudge of a village that might be 2 miles away, or 5, the distance impossible to judge in this light. A single trail of smoke rises from the village, thin and pale, and it climbs straight up for a long way before the breeze catches it and bends it toward the east, where it thins and vanishes. The smoke is the only sign of movement in the entire view, and you watch it with the same quiet attention you have given to the puddles and the clouds and the shadow of your own bow. The trees in the nearer wood are mostly oak, their trunks thick and deeply furrowed, their branches twisted into shapes that seem frozen in the middle of some slow wooden dance. Some of the leaves have fallen and lie in a dark, wet mat at the base of the trees, while others still cling to the twigs, pale and brown and trembling faintly in the breeze that you can barely feel. Among the oaks are a few ash trees, taller and straighter, their bark a smoother, lighter grey, and their leaves have turned a pale yellow that stands out against the darker colours around them. You can pick out individual branches, individual clusters of leaves, and the slow, patient looking becomes a kind of catalogue of small things, each one noted and then released. The field in front of you is not entirely empty. Scattered across the open ground are signs of the army that came before you, and the army that you are part of now. A broken cartwheel lies half submerged in a muddy patch, its wooden spokes dark with water, and its iron rim rusted to a dull orange-brown that is almost the same colour as the mud. Nearby, a length of rope, frayed at one end, coils through the grass like a sleeping snake, its fibres swollen with moisture. Further out, near the middle of the field, you can see a single abandoned shoe, a turned shoe like your own, lying on its side with the toe pointing toward the sky, and you wonder in a distant, unurgent way about the man who lost it, and whether he is somewhere in the line now with one cold bare foot tucked under him. The position of these objects tells a quiet story of movement and stopping, of men and carts and horses passing across this ground in the rain and the dark, and then settling into their places, and now everything is still. The wheel will not move again until someone comes to claim it. The rope will lie there until it rots into the earth. The shoe will fill with water and slowly sink into the mud. These thoughts do not trouble you. They are simply part of the shape of the land, part of the same slow, patient process that has made the furrows and the ditches and the pools of standing water. Your eyes travel back to the distant wood on the right, and you notice now that it is not a solid wall of trees, but a more open wood with spaces between the trunks where the grey light passes through and makes a pattern of vertical stripes against the darker interior. The ground under those trees is covered with fallen leaves, a deep layer of them that looks soft and dry even though you know it must be wet, and the leaves form a continuous carpet of brown and gold that extends as far as you can see into the shadows. The wood looks peaceful, a place of quiet and shelter, and you imagine for a moment what it would be like to stand there instead of here, with your back against a broad oak trunk and the canopy of branches overhead. The imagining is brief and gentle, and then it passes, and you are back in the mud with your bow and your shadow and the slow brightening sky. The water in the nearest puddle has begun to reflect a slightly lighter grey now, catching the growing daylight like a polished stone set into the mud. The surface is still perfectly smooth, and as you look at it, you see your own face reflected there, a dark, indistinct oval with the shape of your shoulders and your bow beside it. The reflection is not sharp enough to show your features, only the general form of a man looking down at himself from above, and you hold your own gaze for a moment before the faintest ripple passes across the water, caused by a drop of moisture falling from the tip of a grass blade, and your face dissolves into a series of soft, expanding circles. The ripple reaches the edge of the puddle and vanishes, and the puddle becomes still again, and your face returns, as patient as before. You could watch this cycle for a long time, and in fact you do, letting the small event of the ripple and the return of stillness become a kind of rhythm that matches the rhythm of your breathing. The world is full of these small cycles, the water and the light and the clouds and the cold, and standing here in the middle of them, you feel less like a man waiting for something and more like a part of the same slow machinery that turns the seasons and draws the mist up from the earth. The cold has settled into a steady, even presence now, no longer deepening but simply staying, a constant cool weight against your skin that you have grown so used to that you would notice its absence more than its presence. Your hands are chill but not numb, and you flex your fingers slowly, feeling the stiffness in the joints, the slight resistance of tendons that have been still for too long. Your toes do the same inside your wet turn shoes, a slow, secret movement that no one else can see, and the small effort of it sends a faint warmth up through your feet and into your ankles before it fades. You shift your weight again, a small adjustment that has become automatic, and feel the mud close around your foot in a slightly different shape, accepting the new position with a soft, wet sound. The ground here is not deep mud, only a few inches of soft soil over a firmer base of clay, and you can feel that clay now under your left heel, a solid, unyielding surface that reminds you that the earth is not endless softness, but has its own bones and its own strength. The clay is the reason the water sits on the surface instead of draining away, a broad, shallow bowl of impermeable ground that holds the rain like a cupped hand, and you are standing in that hand now, patient and still. The landscape around you has revealed all of itself that it is going to reveal, and you have seen it, every furrow and puddle and shadow and distant tree. There is nothing new to discover, but the seeing itself does not stop, because the light keeps changing, and the clouds keep drifting, and your own eyes keep moving, finding the same things over and over again, and finding them slightly different each time. The mud that was dark is now a shade lighter. The puddle that was still has now begun to reflect a patch of lighter sky. The wood that was black is now showing its inner greens and browns, and the whole slow transformation happens so gently that you cannot say when one state ended and the next began. You are aware of the other men around you doing the same thing, looking at the same field, seeing the same shapes, and you know without speaking that each man sees it a little differently, from his own angle, with his own tired eyes. The line of archers stretches on either side of you, all of you facing the same direction, all of you watching the same empty ground, and there is a quiet unity in this shared observation, a sense that you are all holding the field in place simply by looking at it. If no one watched, the field might drift away into the mist, but as long as you stand here with your eyes open, the land stays where it is, solid and real and patient. The day will come fully soon, the mist will burn off, and the waiting will take on a different quality. But for now, the shape of the land is the only thing that matters. The slope, the furrows, the pools, the woods, the broken wheel, the lost shoe, the distant smoke, all of it held in the quiet grey light of a morning that has not yet decided what it wants to be. You are a part of this shape, a vertical line among horizontal lines, a man made of wool and leather and tired muscles standing in the mud with a bow as tall as his own history, and you watch the land with the patient, unhurried attention of someone who has nowhere else to be. The bow in your hand is a thing of simple, careful work, and you have known it so long that it has become less an object and more a part of your body that you only notice when you are not holding it. The stave is made of yew, a single length of wood cut from the place where the dark, dense heartwood meets the paler, more flexible sapwood, and the two layers run together in a wavy line that follows the natural curve of the tree from which it came. The heartwood is a deep reddish-brown, almost the color of old leather, and it forms the belly of the bow, the side that faces you when you draw. The sapwood is a creamy yellow-white, and it forms the back, the side that faces the target. The two colors run parallel to each other for the full length of the stave, never mixing, never separating, a quiet marriage of strength and spring that makes the bow what it is. You run your hand along the back of the bow, feeling the smooth, polished surface of the sapwood under your palm, and you can trace the faint ridges of the growth rings that the bowyer followed when he shaped the stave. Each ring represents a year of the tree's life, a slow, patient season of sun and rain and wind, and the bow holds perhaps 80 or 90 such rings within its length, a record of a century of standing still in an English wood before it was chosen and cut and shaped into the thing you now hold. The thought of the tree is a quiet one, a distant connection to a place and a time that have nothing to do with this muddy field in France, and you let it settle in your mind for a moment before moving on. The nocks at each tip of the bow are made of horn, pale and translucent, fitted over the ends of the stave and glued into place with a dark hard resin that has the color and texture of pine pitch. The nocks are carved with a small smooth groove that holds the bowstring in place, and the groove is worn just slightly from many thousands of strings and unstrings, a tiny polished hollow that fits the string perfectly. You touch the upper nock with the tip of your finger, feeling the cool hard surface of the horn and the slight lip where the groove ends, and the horn is damp from the mist, but still smooth and strong and ready. The bowstring is a simple length of linen, twisted from many thin strands into a single, round cord that is slightly thicker than your smallest finger. It has been waxed many times with beeswax from the lump in your pouch, and the wax has worked its way deep into the fibers, coating each strand with a thin, water-resistant layer that keeps the damp from swelling the linen and making it weak. The string is a pale honey color where the wax has aged and darkened, and it is slightly sticky to the touch, leaving a faint residue on your fingers when you handle it. The two ends of the string are looped and served with finer linen thread, wound tight around the loops to protect them from wear, and the serving is still tight and clean, showing no signs of fraying or loosening. You brace the bow now, not because you need to use it, but because the slow, quiet ritual of bracing is something to do, a small familiar task that occupies your hands and your mind for a few moments. You place the lower limb against the inside of your left foot, stepping through the space between the string and the stave, and then you bend the bow across your body with a steady, even pressure, sliding the loop of the string up into the nock with your right thumb. The bow flexes under your hands, the yew bending in a smooth, even curve that speaks of good tillering, and the string snips into the groove with a soft, final click that you feel more than hear. You release the pressure slowly, letting the bow settle into its braced shape, and the string is now tight and straight, humming faintly if you bring your ear close to it. The braced bow stands taller than you do, the tips curving away from you in a gentle double arc that is the signature of the longbow. The distance between the string and the belly of the bow at its deepest point is about the width of your fist and a thumb, a measurement that you learned as a boy by placing your fist against the stave and seeing if your thumb touched the string. It still does, just barely, and you know that the brace height is correct, that the bow is ready to shoot if it needs to shoot, and that it will wait as patiently as you will. You lower the bow and let the string rest against the ground, the lower tip sinking slightly into the mud, and you think about the bowyer who made this bow, a man whose name you remember but never speak, a quiet, patient man who worked in a small shop near the edge of the village where you grew up. The bowyer had a bench by the window where the light was best, and you remember the smell of the shop, a dry, clean smell of yew shavings and beeswax, and the faint, sharp tang of the hide glue he heated in a small pot over a charcoal fire. You watched him shape this stave over many weeks, visiting after your chores were done, and you remember the way he worked, the wood with a small, curved draw knife, pulling thin, curling shavings from the belly of the bow, with a sound like a long, slow exhale. The bowyer would pause often, sighting down the stave from one end, checking the curve with a practiced eye, and then he would remove another whisper of wood from a spot that only he could see, a spot that was perhaps a little too stiff or a little too thick. The process was slow and careful, and without any hurry, and you learned from watching him that a good bow is not made by force, but by patience, by the slow, steady removal of everything that is not needed, until only the essential shape remains. The bow in your hands is the product of that patience, and you carry it now as a reminder of the bowyer and the shop, and the village and the quiet, steady work of shaping something that will last. You think also of the day you learned to brace a bow yourself, a day when you were still small enough that the bow seemed impossibly large and the string seemed impossibly heavy. Your father showed you the method, placing his own bow against his foot and bending it with a smooth, effortless motion that you tried to copy and failed, tried and failed again, until he came and stood behind you and guided your hands with his own, showing you the angle and the pressure and the steady, patient application of strength. The memory is a warm one, a small, bright point in the long, grey hours of waiting, and you hold it for a moment before letting it slip back into the past where it belongs. The bow is unstrung now, because you do not need it strung, and because keeping a bow strung for too long will make it follow the string, losing its shape and its strength. You reverse the bracing motion, stepping through and releasing the loop from the upper nock, and the bow straightens with a soft, woody sigh, the tension leaving the stave and the string falling slack. You coil the string carefully, looping it around your hand and then tucking the ends under to hold it in place, and you return it to the pouch at your belt where it will stay dry and ready. The bow stands beside you once more, unstrung and patient, and you rest your hand on the upper limb and feel the familiar grain and the small worn nick that you put there so long ago. The wait continues, and the bow waits with you, a companion made of yew and horn and linen and beeswax, shaped by a quiet man in a small village and carried across the sea to this muddy field in France. There is no hurry in it, as there has never been any hurry in it, and you stand together in the grey light, man and bow, patient and still. You reach down to the leather strap that holds your sheaf of arrows against your left hip, and the motion is so slow and so familiar that your fingers find the knot without any help from your eyes. The strap is a single length of cowhide, darkened by years of sweat and rain to a deep, rich brown that is almost black in the creases, and it passes twice around the thickest part of the sheaf before tying in a simple loop that you can loosen with a single pull. You pull it now, feeling the leather give slightly under the steady pressure of your thumb, and the knot comes undone without resistance, the strap falling loose against your thigh while the sheaf remains in place, held by its own weight and the habit of your body. The sheaf itself is a bundle of 24 arrows, each one a straight shaft of poplar wood cut to the length of your arm from elbow to fingertip, and they are bound together near the top and bottom by 2 more leather thongs that keep them from rattling against each other. The poplar is light and pale, almost white where it has been kept dry against your side, but the ends that have been exposed to the air show a faint grey patina from the damp, a colour like old bone left in the weather. You lift the whole sheaf away from your hip with one hand, cradling the bundle in the crook of your arm, while your other hand works the upper thong free, and the arrows shift against each other with a soft wooden clatter that is the loudest sound you have made in hours. The first arrow comes out of the bundle easily, sliding between your fingers as if it knows where it belongs, and you hold it up in front of you at eye level, turning it slowly so that the grey morning light falls along its entire length. The shaft is straight, or nearly straight, and you sight down it like a carpenter checking a plank, Closing one eye and letting the other follow the line from the nock to the point, there is a very slight curve about a third of the way from the head. A bend so gentle that most men would not notice it, but you notice it because you have noticed it before on this same arrow, on other mornings before other fields. It has not grown worse, and it is not enough to throw the arrow off its flight, so you accept it as part of the arrow's own quiet history and move on. Your thumb finds the shaft and begins to run along its length, a slow, even stroke from the iron head down toward the nock, and the poplar is smooth under your skin, polished by countless similar inspections over many months. You can feel the faint ridges left by the plane that shaped it, almost invisible to the eye, but still present to the touch like the memory of a tool, and you can feel the places where your own hand has worn the wood just a little thinner, a slight concavity that fits your fingers perfectly. The shaft is dry, which is good, because damp poplar will swell and soften and then warp, and you take a moment to press the wood against your cheek, feeling its coolness and its dryness, confirming what your fingers already told you. The fletching at the tail of the arrow consists of 3 goose feathers, split and trimmed and bound to the shaft with fine linen thread that has been coated in a thin layer of glue. The feathers are grey and white, the natural colours of a barnyard goose, and they sweep back from the shaft in a gentle curve that spirals just enough to make the arrow spin in flight. You run your fingertip along the edge of each feather, checking for splits or frays, and you find one small barb that has separated from its neighbours, a tiny rift no longer than a grain of barley. You smooth it back into place with a slow, deliberate pressure of your thumb, and the feather accepts the correction without complaint, its fibres realigning themselves as if they had never been disturbed. The linen binding that holds the feathers to the shaft is still tight, the thread showing no signs of loosening or rot, and you test it by catching your fingernail under one loop and tugging very gently. The thread does not move, and the glue beneath it has dried to a hard, transparent shell that protects the binding from moisture. You turn the arrow over and check the other side of the fletching, finding the same condition, the same quiet integrity, and then you move your attention to the nock at the very end of the shaft. A small slot cut into the poplar and reinforced with a slip of horn that was fitted and glued by a man whose name you do not know. The horn is pale and smooth, and the slot is clean, free of cracks, ready to accept the bowstring whenever it is asked. The iron head of the arrow is a bodkin point, a simple square section spike that tapers to a sharp, dull grey tip, designed to pass through mail and padding without catching. The metal is dark now with a fine layer of oil that you applied 2 days ago, and beneath the oil there is a faint bloom of orange rust just beginning to form along one edge where the damp has been most persistent. You breathe on the rust spot, a slow, warm breath that fogs the metal, and then you rub it gently with the corner of your wool tunic, working the oil back into the surface until the orange disappears and only the dark, oiled steel remains. The point pricks your thumb when you test it, a tiny, sharp sting that does not break the skin, but reminds you that the arrow is ready for its purpose, and you are satisfied. You place the first arrow back into the sheath, but you do not return it to the same position. Instead, you lay it against your leg and draw out the second arrow, repeating the same slow sequence of movements, the sighting down the shaft, the running of the thumb, the inspection of the fletching, the check of the nock, and the careful cleaning of the point. The second arrow is slightly darker than the first, its poplar shaft having been cut from a different tree, and the feathers are a deeper grey with a single white stripe down the centre of each vein. The stripe makes it easy to identify, and you recognize it as one of the arrows you fletched yourself last winter, sitting by the fire while the rain beat against the shutters and the glue pot bubbled softly on the hearthstone. The glue on this arrow has held perfectly, the thread is tight, and the shaft is as straight as any you have ever made. You feel a small, private satisfaction in that. Not pride exactly, but a quiet recognition of work. Well done. Work that has lasted through months of carrying and damp and cold. The point is clean, the nock is sound, and you return this arrow to the sheath with the same gentle care, placing it beside the first one so that the 2 shafts lie parallel, touching but not pressing, the feathers nestling into the space left by their neighbours. The third arrow comes out, and the fourth, and the fifth, and the rhythm of the inspection settles over you like a slow, steady rain. Each arrow is the same in its general shape and purpose, but each one is also slightly different. A darker feather here, a lighter shaft there, a tiny knot in the poplar that you remember from the day you first noticed it. The sixth arrow has a small dent in the shaft just above the fletching, a mark left by the edge of a shield during practice, and you run your thumb over it several times, feeling the slight depression that does not weaken the arrow but gives it a unique identity, a story that only you can read. The seventh arrow is one of the older ones, an arrow that has been in your sheath for more than a year, and its shaft is darker than the others, stained by time and handling to a warm honey-brown color that speaks of many inspections, many cleanings, many quiet moments, exactly like this one. The fletching on this arrow has been replaced twice, the current feathers still fresh and crisp compared to the aged shaft, and the binding thread is a slightly different color, paler and newer, a visible record of repair and renewal. You treat this arrow no differently from the others, but you perhaps spend a little longer with it, turning it in your hands and remembering without urgency the day you refletched it, the patience of splitting feathers with a small sharp knife and trimming them to exactly the right shape. By the time you reach the 12th arrow, you have settled into a deep, calm focus that is not concentration so much as presence, a state of simply being with each arrow as it comes to your hands. The world around you has faded to a soft, distant murmur, and the only things that exist are the poplar shaft, the goose feathers, the linen thread, the iron point, and the slow, steady movements of your own fingers. You wipe a smear of mud from the tip of the 13th arrow, mud that must have splashed up during the night when you adjusted your stance, and you clean it off carefully with a fold of your tunic, making sure no grit remains to dull the edge or cling to the oil. The 14th arrow has a slightly loose fletching, one feather that has begun to lift away from the shaft along its leading edge, and you pause to press it back down, holding it in place for a slow count of 20 while the old glue softens just enough from the warmth of your fingers to re-adhere. This is a temporary fix, you know, and when there is time you will need to re-glue it properly, but for now the warmth and pressure are enough, and the feather stays down when you release it. You make a mental note of which arrow this is, marking it by the particular pattern of its feathers, a pattern you will remember without effort because you have already memorized every arrow in your sheath. The 15th arrow is perfect, the 16th is perfect, the 17th has a small burr on the iron point that you smooth away with the flat of your knife blade, a slow scraping sound that whispers across the quiet field. The 18th arrow is the palest of them all, cut from the sapwood of a young poplar, and its lightness makes it look fragile even though you know it is as strong as any of the others, capable of driving through oak boards at 100 paces. You handle it with the same calm care, checking its straightness, its fletching, its knock, and its point before returning it to the bundle. The 19th arrow is the one you have carried longest, older even than the 7th, and its shaft is dark with age and smooth as polished stone from years of handling. The feathers are warm soft at the tips, the thread is faded, and the iron point has a patina of fine pitting that no amount of oil can remove, but the arrow is still true, still straight, still ready. You hold it for a longer moment, feeling the weight of all the times you have drawn this arrow from the sheath and knocked it and let it fly into targets of straw or wood or earth, never yet into a living man, and you feel a quiet kinship with it, a shared patience, a shared waiting. The 20th arrow has a small crack in the horn knock, a crack you have been watching for weeks, and you examine it again now with the same slow, unhurried attention. The crack has not grown, and the horn is still firmly seated in the poplar, so you decide once more that the arrow is safe to keep. You will replace the knock when you return home, whenever that may be, and until then the arrow will serve if it is needed, and if it is not needed, it will wait in the sheath with the others, patient and still. The 21st arrow is unremarkable in every way, and you pass through its inspection quickly, but without haste, letting the familiar motions carry you forward. The 22nd arrow has a feather that is slightly twisted, a flaw you have never been able to correct, and you accept it as you have accepted the bent shaft of the first arrow, as a small imperfection that does not matter in the larger scheme of things. The 23rd arrow is damp near the point, and you dry it carefully with the inside of your sleeve, feeling the moisture lift away under the absorbent wool. The 24th and final arrow is the one you always inspect last, because it rests at the very back of the sheath, pressed against your hip, and it is often the wettest from the warmth of your body condensing in the cold air. You dry it as you dried the 23rd, and then you give it the full inspection, the sighting, the stroking, the fletching check, the knock check, the point check. It is a good arrow, straight and true and ready, and when you are finished, you place it back into the sheath with the others, the bundle now complete. Every arrow accounted for and known. You gather the sheath together, aligning the shafts so that they lie parallel and neat, and you pull the upper thong tight around them with a slow, steady pressure, cinching it down until the arrows can no longer shift or rattle. The lower thong follows, and then the main strap that holds the whole bundle to your hip, and you tie the knot with the same simple loop you have tied 1,000 times before, a loop that will hold until you need it to release. The sheath settles against your side, its familiar weight pressing through your tunic and gambeson, and you let your hand rest on the feathered ends for a moment, feeling the soft, even texture of the goose feathers under your palm. The inspection is complete, and nothing has changed, and nothing was expected to change. You have simply touched and seen and known each arrow in turn, a quiet ritual that has filled the time with small, tangible facts about poplar and iron and feather and thread. The arrows are ready, as they were ready before, and you are ready in the same way, standing in the mud with your bow and your sheath, and the long grey morning stretching out ahead of you like a road that has no destination but the present moment. The cold begins to deepen as the light fades, not with any sudden drop, but with a slow, persistent creep that moves from the outside of your clothing toward the inside of your skin, and you feel it first in the places where the cloth is thinnest and the damp has settled most deeply. The evening is coming on now, the grey sky darkening from ash to slate to charcoal, in the same gradual way it did the night before, and you know that the hours ahead will be colder still. The kind of cold that makes a man aware of every layer between himself and the air. You do not resist this awareness, but let it come, turning your attention slowly to the clothes that cover you, piece by piece, from the skin outward. Next to your skin is a shirt of linen, cut simply from a single width of cloth, with sleeves that reach to your wrists and a hem that falls to the middle of your thighs. The linen is undyed, a pale cream color that has yellowed slightly with age and many washings, and it is soft now in the way that only old linen becomes soft, its fibers worn smooth by years of friction against your body. You can feel it against your shoulders where the weight of your outer clothing presses it into your flesh, and you can feel it against your chest where it moves with each slow breath. A light, familiar touch that you have worn so long it has become part of your own sensation of yourself. The collar is open and loose, held by a single loop and toggle made of bone, and the air that reaches your throat there is cooler than the air trapped inside the shirt, a small constant reminder of the difference between your own warmth and the world's cold. The linen is damp now, not soaked but holding a faint moisture that comes from your body's own slow exhalation through the skin, a moisture that the cold air cannot lift away because the layers above it hold it in place. You can feel this dampness as a slight clinging of the cloth to your lower back when you shift your posture, a brief, cool adhesion that releases as soon as you settle again. The seams of the shirt are flat-felled, sewn so that no raw edge touches your skin, and you can trace one of these seams with your mind's eye as it runs from under your left arm down along your ribs, a tiny ridge of thread that you have never consciously felt until this moment. The sleeves are gathered slightly at the wrist, just enough to keep them from sliding down over your hands when you reach for something, and the gathering creates a small, soft cuff that brushes against the base of your palm each time you move your fingers. Over the linen shirt you wear a gambeson, a padded tunic made of many layers of linen stitched together in vertical rows that run from the collar to the hem like the lines of a ploughed field. The layers are not all the same. The outer and inner layers are a tighter, smoother weave, while the middle layers are coarser, fluffed slightly from repeated washing to create a dense, resilient padding that traps air and slows the passage of cold. You can feel the weight of the gambeson across your shoulders as a steady, even pressure, heavier than the shirt, but still so familiar that you rarely notice it. And now that you do notice it, you are aware of the way it wraps around your torso like a firm, steady hug that never loosens. The stitching that holds the layers together is visible on the outside of the gambeson as a pattern of closely spaced, parallel lines that run straight down from your collarbones to your waist and then flare slightly over your hips. each line of stitching is a tiny hard ridge under your fingers when you touch it, the thread having been pulled tight and then washed and dried many times until it became a permanent part of the fabric. You can feel these ridges now, as you let your hand rest against your own thigh, the gambeson's hem brushing your knuckles, and you can feel the slight variation in thickness from one stitched channel to the next, a subtle landscape of cloth that you know as well as you know the shape of your own hands. The gambeson has no sleeves of its own, leaving your arms free to move, and the armholes are cut wide and bound with a strip of leather to prevent fraying, a leather binding that has darkened to a deep, waxy brown and grown soft with age. You can feel the edge of this binding against your upper arm when you let your arm hang straight down, a narrow line of slightly cooler material that marks the boundary between the padded body of the garment and the open air. Under your arms, the gambeson is gusseted with a diamond-shaped piece of fabric that allows the layers to move without pulling, and you can feel that gusset working now as you slowly roll your shoulders back, a small adjustment that the garment accommodates without resistance. Over the gambeson comes your wool tunic, the heaviest and thickest layer, and it is this tunic that carries the most stories of the cold night. The wool is a coarse, fulled cloth woven from the fleece of sheep that graze on the wet green hills of your own country, and it is undyed, the natural color of the wool varying from a dark brownish gray across the shoulders to a slightly lighter shade under the arms where the fleece was taken from a different part of the animal. The surface of the wool is not smooth, but slightly napped, covered with a fine soft fuzz that catches the light and holds tiny beads of moisture, and when you look down at your own chest, you can see thousands of these beads glistening faintly, too small to be called drops, but together forming a kind of silver sheen that covers you like a second, wetter skin. Wetter skin. The tunic is cut long, reaching almost to your knees, and it is split at the sides from the hip down to allow you to walk and to reach your belt without lifting the hem. The seams are stitched with heavy linen thread, and you can feel them as thick, raised lines against your body, particularly where the shoulder seams meet the neckline and create a small, double thickness that rests against your collarbones. The neckline itself is a simple round opening, bound with a strip of softer wool that has been folded over and stitched down, and it is this binding that touches your throat directly, a constant, slightly scratchy presence that you have long since stopped noticing as anything other than a part of being clothed. The sleeves of the tunic are wide enough to push back when you draw your bow, but now they hang straight down over your wrists, their edges damp and dark with absorbed moisture, and you can feel the cold weight of the wet wool against the back of your hands whenever you move them. The dampness of the tunic is a slow, deep thing, not the wetness of rain, but the wetness of hours spent in mist and cold air, a moisture that has worked its way into every fiber and now sits there, heavy and chill. You can feel this moisture as an added weight, the tunic pulling downward on your shoulders just slightly more than it did when it was dry, and you can feel it as a coolness that presses through the gambeson and the shirt and reaches your skin in a diffuse, steady way, not cold enough to make you shiver, but cold enough to remind you that the night is long. The wool, even wet, holds some warmth, the natural lanolin still present in the fibers repelling the worst of the water and trapping a thin layer of air close to your body. And you are grateful for that without thinking about gratitude, simply accepting the small comfort as part of the natural order. At your waist, a leather belt pulls the tunic in against your body, creating a slight bunching of the wool above and below it that helps to seal in the warmth of your core. The belt is a simple strip of cowhide, about 2 fingers wide, cut from the back of the animal where the hide is thickest, and it has been dyed a dark brown with oak galls and iron, a color that has faded and crackled over the years to reveal the lighter, natural leather beneath. You can feel the belt as a firm, even pressure around your middle, tight enough to keep it in place, but not so tight that it restricts your breathing. And the pressure is a familiar one, a kind of constant, gentle boundary between your upper and lower body. The buckle is iron, simple and square, with a single tongue that fits through one of several holes punched into the far end of the leather. You have used the same hole for so long that the leather around it has compressed and darkened, and the hole itself has stretched just enough to make the tongue slide through easily without ever slipping loose on its own. Above the buckle, a small leather keeper holds the loose end of the belt flat against your waist, preventing it from flapping or catching on anything. And you can feel the slight bulge of the keeper through the wool of your tunic whenever you press your arm against your side. From the belt hangs your pouch, a simple bag of soft oiled leather drawn shut with a leather cord, and inside it are the small things you carry: the lump of beeswax for your bowstring, a spare bowstring coiled tightly and wrapped in oiled cloth, a few hard crumbs of bread from the day before, a small bone needle threaded with linen, and a smooth dark stone that you picked up years ago for no reason that you can now recall. The pouch hangs against your right hip, a soft, heavy weight that swings slightly when you shift your position. And you can feel it there as a constant presence, a small private collection of necessities and memories that no one else will ever see. Your legs are covered by woolen hose, cut and sewn from the same bolt of cloth as your tunic, and they fit close to the skin from your waist down to your toes. Each leg is a separate piece, shaped to the curve of your calf and thigh, with a seam that runs up the back from the heel to the top, and they are held up by ties that pass through the bottom of your tunic and fasten to a cord at your waist. The hose are soaked below the knee where the mud has reached, and the wet wool clings to your shins and calves with a cold, heavy grip that makes you aware of every muscle and bone in your lower legs. You can feel the exact line where the wetness stops, a gradual transition just below the back of your knee, above which the wool is merely damp and cool rather than sodden. The mud has worked its way into the fibers of the hose as well, not deep mud, but a fine brown silt that has settled into the weave and will need to be washed out in a stream or a basin someday. You can feel the faint grittiness of it when you rub your legs together, a tiny sandy friction that is not uncomfortable but simply present, another texture in a world of many textures. The hose are patched at the right knee with a piece of darker wool, a mend you made yourself last spring after a fall on a stony path, and the stitches are small and uneven, but they have held, and you run your thumb over them now, feeling the slight ridge of the patch against the original fabric. Over the hose you wear nothing else except the turn shoes on your feet, simple leather coverings that are more like heavy socks with a sole than proper shoes. The leather is cowhide, turned inside out during the making so that the smooth inner side faces outward, and it is worn to a soft, pliable state that molds to the shape of your feet like a second skin. The seam runs around the edge of your foot, a hand-stitched line of waxed thread that joins the upper to the sole, and you can feel it as a small, tough ridge against your toes when you curl them. The soles are a single thickness of leather, now worn paper-thin at the heel and the ball of the foot, and you can feel the texture of the mud through them, the smooth, cold slickness of the wet clay, the occasional small stone that presses a sharp point against your heel before sinking back into the mire. Your feet inside the turn shoes are wet, have been wet for hours, and the skin of your toes is wrinkled and soft from the constant moisture, but you are not uncomfortable in a way that demands attention. The cold has numbed your feet just enough that they feel distant, belonging to you but not urgently yours, and you can move your toes inside the leather with a slow, underwater motion that sends faint ripples of sensation up through your ankles. The turn shoes are tied around the ankle with a simple leather thong that passes through a series of small slits, and the thong is tied in a knot that you could undo with one hand if you needed to, though you do not need to, and so it stays tied, patient and secure. The layers of your clothing work together in a quiet, steady partnership, each one doing its small part to keep you alive and standing through the long, cold hours. The linen shirt wicks the moisture from your skin. The gambeson traps a layer of still air that your body warms. The wool tunic sheds the worst of the wind and the damp. The leather belt holds everything in place. The hose and turn shoes cover your legs and feet as best they can. And the whole assembly is heavy, you realize, heavier than it was when you first put it on, the combined weight of wool and linen and leather and absorbed water pressing down on your frame with a slow, patient gravity. You can feel this weight in your shoulders most of all, a deep, dull ache that has been building all night and that now spreads down into your upper arms and up into your neck, not painful so much as present. A constant reminder of the hours you have spent standing in the mud with your bow and your sheaf and your thoughts. The ache is not a complaint, but a fact, like the damp or the cold or the grey sky, and you acknowledge it without judgment, letting it settle into the background of your awareness alongside all the other quiet sensations of the night. The air around you has grown colder in the last hour, and you notice it now on your face and hands, the only parts of you that are fully exposed. Your cheeks are cool and slightly stiff, the skin drawn tight over the bones, and your lips are dry from breathing through them during the long watches of the night. You run your tongue over them once, slowly, feeling the small cracks and roughnesses, and then you pull your head down just a little deeper into the collar of your tunic, trying to trap a bit more warmth around your neck. The wool of the collar is wet and cold against your chin, but beneath it, after a moment, you feel the faint, private warmth of your own breath reflected back at you, a small pocket of comfort in the vast, chill darkness. Your hands are chilled, the fingers stiff and slow to respond, and you tuck them one at a time under the front hem of your gambeson, pressing them against the worn linen of your shirt, where it covers your stomach. The warmth there is a gentle, steady heat, the core heat of your body that has not yet surrendered to the cold, and you feel it seep into your fingers slowly, easing the stiffness in your knuckles and bringing a faint, pleasant tingling to the tips. You leave your hands there for a long time, feeling your own warmth, feeling the slow rise and fall of your breath under them, and the simple act of warming your hands becomes the whole of your attention for a while. When you finally withdraw your hands and let them fall back to your sides, the cold reclaims them slowly, but you do not mind, because the memory of the warmth is still there, a small gentle residue that will last for a little while longer. You adjust your belt slightly, pulling it up a fraction of an inch and then settling it back into its groove, a tiny ritual that accomplishes nothing but feels satisfying in its familiarity. The leather of the belt is cool and smooth under your fingers, the buckle cold and hard, and the pouch at your hip bumps gently against your thigh as you move. You are, in this moment, a collection of simple materials arranged in a particular way, linen and wool and leather and thread, all of them shaped by hands you will never know and assembled by your own hands into the armor of the everyday. There is no glamour in any of it, no wealth or status, only the quiet, honest utility of things made to last and to serve, and you feel a kinship with these things that is hard to put into words but easy to feel. They have waited with you as you have waited, and they will continue to wait, patient and faithful, through the rest of the night and into whatever the morning brings. Darkness settles over the field like a slow, cool hand, and as the last grey light retreats into the western horizon, the world shrinks from a place of shapes and distances into a place of sounds. Your eyes, which have served you all day, become almost useless beyond the reach of your own arm, able to see only the faintest outline of the bow standing beside you and the slightly darker shape of the mud at your feet. Everything else dissolves into a single, deep blackness that has no depth and no direction. It is in this new, close darkness that your ears begin to open in a different way, not straining, but simply receiving, and you become aware of the many small noises that have been hidden all day beneath the larger silence of the light. The first and most constant sound is the low murmur of men talking in scattered groups along the line. It is not a sound made of distinct words, but rather a soft, continuous texture, a human hum that rises and falls in gentle waves without any pattern you can discern. Somewhere to your left, 3 or 4 voices are exchanging quiet sentences about something that does not carry, their tones so level and unhurried that the conversation might be about the weather, or the condition of a bowstring, or the memory of a meal eaten days ago. Further off, to your right, a single voice speaks for a longer stretch, while others listen in silence, and though you cannot catch a single syllable, you can tell from the cadence that it is a story of some kind, a slow, meandering tale told to pass the hours. The murmur never rises to anything that could be called a noise. It stays low and steady, a river of quiet voices flowing through the dark. Between the waves of talk, other sounds emerge and then fade back into the stillness. A cough breaks out somewhere down the line, a dry single sound that does not repeat, and then a moment later another cough answers it from a different direction, as if the 2 men are signaling each other across the darkness without meaning to. The coughs are not the deep, racking coughs of sickness, but the small, ordinary clearings of a throat that has been too long unused, and after the second one, the silence returns and folds itself around the place where the sounds had been. You can hear, in the pause that follows, the faint, wet sound of your own weight adjusting in the mud, the soft squelch of the leather soles of your turn shoes sinking a little deeper and then settling with a final, sighing release. from somewhere behind the line of archers, where the main body of the army has made its camp for the night, there comes the distinct metallic clink of a cookpot being lifted and set down again on a stone or another pot. The sound is small but carries clearly through the damp air, a brief bright note that rings for a fraction of a moment and then disappears into the general murmur. It is followed a long while later by the softer scrape of a wooden spoon against the inside of a bowl, a sound so familiar and domestic that it seems out of place on a muddy field in a foreign country. And yet it fits perfectly into the quiet texture of the night, a reminder that even here, men must eat and clean their bowls and go about the small, necessary tasks of living. You notice now the distant whicker of a horse from the lines far to the rear, a low, breathy sound that is half a greeting and half a question. The horse is answered by another, a little closer, and then a third, even fainter, and the small conversation of horses ripples through the dark for a few seconds before trailing off into silence. You can picture them without seeing them, the great, patient animals standing hip-shot in their picket lines, their breath steaming in the cold air, their ears turning slowly to catch the sounds of the men around them. The thought is a gentle one, and you hold it for a moment before letting it go. The soft rustle of a banner shifting in the damp breeze is the next sound to make itself known, a slow, rhythmic whisper of heavy cloth moving against its wooden staff. The breeze is so light that you feel it only as a faint coolness on your right cheek, barely enough to stir the wall of your tunic. But it is enough to lift the edge of the banner somewhere behind you and let it fall again. Lift and fall, with a patient, repetitive motion that has no hurry in it. The rustle is not a snap or a flap, but a gentle brushing sound, like a woman sweeping a floor with a broom of soft rushes, and it blends into the background of the night so completely that after a while you stop hearing it as a separate thing and simply accept it as part of the stillness. The rain has stopped as you knew it would, and the absence of its soft hiss leaves a new kind of silence that is not empty, but full of the memory of water. The only reminders of the rain are the slow, irregular drips that fall from the leaves of the distant trees, each one landing on the wet ground with a tiny, soft tap that is more felt than heard. The drips are widely spaced, coming one at a time with long pauses between them, and you find yourself listening for the next one without any sense of anticipation, simply noting its arrival when it comes and then letting it go. Occasionally, a drip lands in a puddle, and the sound is slightly different, a small liquid plink that ripples outward and fades, leaving the puddle as still as it was before. Your own breathing has become part of the soundscape of the night, a slow, steady rhythm that you can hear from the inside as a faint rushing in your ears, and from the outside as the softest possible movement of air past your lips. You are not the only one breathing. All around you, the line of archers is a long, quiet chain of exhalations and inhalations, each man's breath slightly different in pace and depth, but all of them together forming a vast communal respiration that seems to belong to the night itself. You can hear the man to your left taking a deeper breath than he needs and letting it out in a long, slow sigh, a sigh that carries no emotion but only the need to fill the lungs and empty them again, and you match your own next breath to his, without meaning to. A new sound comes from the woods on the left, a soft, rustling movement that might be a fox or a badger, or simply the weight of a dead branch, finally giving way and falling through the undergrowth. The rustling lasts for a few seconds and then stops, and the silence that follows is so complete that you can hear the blood moving in your own ears, a distant, ocean-like sound that you have always known but rarely notice. You listen to that inner sound for a while, letting the outer world fade just a little, and then you return your attention to the camp, where the low murmur of voices has changed its tone slightly, becoming slower and sleepier as the night deepens. Someone, not far away, is humming a tune under his breath, a melody so faint and fragmentary that you catch only a few notes before it breaks off and starts again. The same few notes repeated over and over, as if the hummer has forgotten the rest of the song and is content to loop through the part he remembers. The notes are simple and slow, a minor descending phrase that sounds like a lullaby or a hymn, and they weave themselves into the texture of the night so gently that you might have been imagining them, except that when the humming stops for a moment, you notice its absence and then notice its return with a quiet, unsurprised pleasure. From the direction of the cook fires, which you cannot see but can locate by the faint, occasional smell of wood smoke, there comes the soft sound of a fire being tended. A low crackle as a log shifts and settles into the embers, followed by the brief hiss of something wet meeting the heat. The fire is far enough away that the sound is very small, a miniature version of the great roaring campfire sounds you remember from other nights, and it makes you think of the warmth that must be there. The circle of men sitting or lying close to the flames, their faces lit in orange and gold. You are not near the fire, and you will not be near it tonight, but the thought of it is a small comfort, a reminder that warmth exists somewhere and will come again. The man to your right, who has been silent for hours, shifts his weight with a great squelching sound as his feet pull free of the mud and resettle in a slightly different position. The squelch is louder than you expected, a wet, sucking noise that seems to echo for a moment before the soft ground absorbs it, and it is followed by a low grunt of effort or relief that is barely more than an exhalation. You shift your own weight a few moments later, not because you need to, but because the sound of his movement has reminded your body that it can move, and your own squelch is softer, more deliberate, as if you are trying to be quieter than he was. The mud accepts your new position with a sound like a slow, deep kiss, and then you are still again. Far away, on the edge of hearing, a dog barks in the distant village you saw earlier as a smudge of rooftops and a trail of smoke. The bark is thin and lonely, a single, sharp note that carries across the fields and the woods and the open ground before fading into the high, cold air. You wait for an answering bark, but none comes, and the silence after the bark is deeper than it was before, a silence that seems to have been shaped by the sound that occupied it. The dog will not bark again for a long time, and when it does, you might not be awake to hear it. The clink of metal on metal reaches you now from the direction of the men-at-arms behind the archers' line, a faint, rhythmic chinking that might be someone checking the rivets on a piece of armor or someone sharpening a blade with a small whetstone. The sound is careful and slow. Scrape, pause, a man working by touch in the dark on a task that requires just enough attention to pass the time, but not so much that it feels like labor. The scrape of the whetstone is a dry, grating sound that sets your teeth on edge for only a moment before you relax into it, accepting its presence as part of the larger concert of the night. You become aware of a very small, very close sound. The soft rustle of your own tunic as you breathe. The wool moving against the wool of your gambeson with each rise and fall of your chest. The sound is so intimate and so constant that you are surprised you have not noticed it before, and now that you have, you cannot unnotice it, so you let it be there. A tiny, private rhythm that belongs only to you. The rustle is not a scratch or a scrape, but a gentle, brushing whisper, and it reminds you of the sound of wind through dry winter grass, a sound you remember from walking the fields near your home in the cold months when the earth was hard and the sky was low and grey. A man somewhere ahead of you, out in the darkness where the stakes have been planted, is reciting something in a low, rhythmic voice, a string of words that might be a prayer or a charm, or simply a list of things he wants to remember. The voice is so quiet that you cannot tell what language it is, and the rhythm is so even that it becomes almost hypnotic, a slow, steady beat of syllables that rises and falls like a small tide. You do not try to understand the words, you let them wash over you as sound and nothing more, and after a while, the voice stops mid-phrase, leaving the phrase unfinished and the silence more complete. The night has now settled into its deepest, darkest hour, the time when even the most wakeful men begin to feel the pull of sleep. The sounds at the camp have grown fewer and softer, the conversations dying away to single words and then to nothing, the horses silent, the banners still, the cook fires burning low and quiet. The only sound that remains constant is the slow collective breathing of the army, a vast, gentle respiration that seems to rise from the earth itself, and you feel yourself becoming part of that breath, your own inhales and exhales blending with the thousands of others until you can no longer tell where yours end and theirs begin. The drip from the leaves has slowed to almost nothing, a single drop every few minutes that falls with a soft, patient finality. The mud around your feet has grown cooler, and you adjust your weight again, a tiny, incremental movement that produces only the quietest of squelches, a sound so small that it might have been made by a frog or a worm rather than a man. Your hands are cold, and you press them together in front of you, palm to palm, feeling the rough, chilled skin of your own fingers, and the faint whisper of skin against skin is a sound you hear more through your bones than through your ears. The breeze has shifted slightly, coming now from the north instead of the west, and it brings with it a new scent and a new sound, the distant, barely audible hiss of wind moving through the bare branches of the winter trees in the wood. The sound is a soft, sibilant shushing, like a parent quieting a child, and it drifts across the field in gentle gusts that rise and fall and rise again. You turn your head just enough to face the sound, letting it reach both ears equally, and you close your eyes for a moment to hear it more clearly, the whisper of air through wood and the whisper of your own breath joining together. When you open your eyes again, nothing has changed, which is exactly what you expected. The darkness is still deep, the sounds are still quiet, the mud is still cold. The low murmur of the army has not returned, and the night has become a vast, soft silence, punctuated only by the smallest of noises, a distant cough, a creak of leather, a single, soft plop, as a bit of mud falls from your bow into the puddle at your feet. You listen to the silence as if it were a sound in itself, a deep, resonant hum that underlies everything, and you find that it is not emptiness, but fullness, a presence as real as the ground and the sky. In this deep stillness, your own thoughts slow until they are barely moving, a gentle drift of images and memories that do not demand your attention. The face of someone you knew a long time ago, the pattern of frost on a window, the feel of dry straw under your back, the taste of broth on a cold day. The images come and go without leaving a mark, and you watch them pass with the same detached, peaceful attention you have given to the sounds of the night. You are not asleep, but you are not fully awake either. You are somewhere in between, in a state that has no name. A quiet resting of the mind and body that is as deep and restful as sleep itself. The night will not last forever, but it does not need to. The sounds will continue in their soft, slow way until the first grey light begins to return, and you will be here to hear them. A still, patient listener in the mud, a single ear among many ears, all of you sharing the same darkness and the same quiet and the same long, slow breath of the sleeping camp. There is no urgency in any of this, no need to be anywhere else or do anything else. There is only the darkness and the sounds and the slow, steady rhythm of your own presence, patient and still. The clouds begin to thin, not with any sudden parting, but through a gradual, almost reluctant loosening of their weave, as if the sky is a piece of grey wool being gently stretched until the first pale threads of light can pass between the fibers. You do not notice the exact moment when the change begins, because you have been looking down at the mud or resting your eyes in the darkness for what feels like a very long time. But when you raise your head again, the quality of the blackness overhead has altered. It is no longer the deep, solid dark of a full overcast, but a softer, more textured darkness, a darkness with depths and faint luminosities, and in one place, just above the distant wood on your right, there is a patch of lighter grey that seems to glow from within. You watch that patch without expectation, letting your tired eyes adjust to its presence, and as the minutes pass, the patch grows slightly larger and slightly brighter, its edges softening and spreading until it becomes a broad, diffuse glow that pushes back the surrounding darkness. The moon is somewhere behind that glow, still hidden by the last, thinnest layer of cloud, but already sending its light ahead like a quiet announcement of its arrival. And you can feel the change on your face as a faint, silvery coolness that is different from the coolness of the air alone. It is a light that carries no warmth, but seems to promise light nonetheless, and you turn your face toward it with the same slow, patient attention you would give to a distant, half-remembered sound. When the moon finally emerges, it does so by slipping free of the cloud edge so gradually that you see the shape of it before you see the light. A pale, perfect disk that seems at first to be just another variation in the grey, until it clears the last wisp of vapour and becomes unmistakably itself. The moon is nearly full, perhaps a day or two past its peak, and the leftmost edge shows the faintest beginning of a shadow that will grow over the coming nights into a crescent, and then a sliver, and then nothing. For now, though, the shadow is so small that you have to look directly at it to confirm its presence, and once confirmed it becomes a quiet marker of time's slow passage, a small imperfection that makes the moon more real. The light that falls from the moon is pale and watery, a thin, silver-grey illumination that does not so much light the field as stain it, washing the mud and the grass and the distant woods in a color that is almost blue and almost white and neither. Shadows reappear, but they are not the sharp, black shadows of sunlight. They are soft-edged, diffuse, and they seem to float just above the ground rather than anchoring firmly to it. Your own shadow has returned, stretching out to your left now instead of your right, and it lies across the mud like a wash of thinned ink, its edges blurring into the surrounding dimness so that you cannot say exactly where you end and the shadow begins. The stars, which had been hidden entirely by the clouds, now reveal themselves in a slow, patient unveiling that moves from the zenith outward. The first ones you see are the brightest pale points of steady light that push through the thinning overcast while the moon is still behind the trees, and you pick them out one by one without any hurry, letting your eyes wander across the dark dome of the sky until they find the next small spark, and then the next. The stars are not scattered randomly but arranged in patterns that you have known since you were a child, patterns that your father pointed out to you on nights much like this one. Standing outside the door of your home, with the cold earth underfoot and the quiet dark all around, you find the constellation that looks like a great plough, or perhaps a wagon, or perhaps a bear, depending on who is telling the story, and you trace its shape with your eyes from the 3 bright stars of the handle to the 4 stars of the body. A shape so clear and so familiar that it needs no name. The plough stands nearly upright tonight, its handle pointing down toward the horizon, and its body tilted as if it has been left in the middle of a furrow by a farmer who has gone inside for the night. You think of that imagined farmer for a moment, a man standing in his own field in a different country, looking up at the same stars, while his oxen shift in their stalls, and his family sleeps, and the thought is a quiet, peaceful one that passes without leaving a trace. Another constellation catches your eye, a long irregular chain of dimmer stars that stretches across the southern sky like a road made of scattered flour. You follow it with your gaze as far as you can before it fades into the mist near the horizon, and you remember that someone once told you it was a river, a sky river that the dead must cross, but you cannot remember who told you that or whether you believe it. The stars are just stars after all, distant fires burning in the great dark for reasons no one fully understands, and the patterns we draw between them are only our own need for order reflected back at us. Still, the river is a comforting thought, a quiet flow of light across the roof of the world, and you let your eyes drift along its course for a long time without once feeling the need to look away. Between the constellations, in the darker spaces where the smaller stars hide, you can see the faint, cloudy band of light that stretches from one horizon to the other, like a trail of spilled milk. The band is the Milky Way, though you do not call it that, and you have heard it described as the seam of the sky, the place where the 2 halves of the celestial bowl were stitched together at the beginning of things. The stitching shows tonight as a soft, luminous fog made of a billion stars too faint to see individually, their light blended into a single continuous glow that arches overhead from the northeastern dark to the southwestern horizon. The Milky Way is brighter near the zenith, where the thinning clouds have cleared entirely, and dimmer near the edges, where the mist and the last remnants of the overcast blur its outline into the surrounding black. You notice now that the mist has begun to rise again from the wet earth, a thin white layer that hovers just above the ground and moves only when the faintest stirring of air pushes it one way or another. The moonlight catches the mist and turns it into a pale, luminous sea that reaches no higher than your knees, and through this sea, the thousands of upright bows planted in the mud appear as dark, vertical lines rising from the whiteness like the masts of sunken ships. The bows are planted at irregular intervals, some close together, some spaced widely apart, and their tips reach up into the darkness above the mist where the moonlight catches them one by one, each tip wearing a small silver cap of reflected light. From where you stand, the line of bows stretching away to your left and right looks like a leafless thicket, a winter wood of yew staves that has grown up overnight in the middle of this French field. The moonlight moves along the line as the clouds shift overhead, illuminating a dozen boughs at a time before passing on to the next dozen, and the effect is like watching a slow, silent wave of light traveling across the face of a dark lake. The bow nearest to you, your own bow, catches the light on its upper nock and on the waxed string that runs from tip to tip, and the string gleams with a faint silver line that is almost too thin to see. A single thread of light stretched taut in the darkness. The moon continues its slow drift across the sky, a movement so gradual that you cannot perceive it directly, but only infer it from the changing position of the shadows and the shifting angle of the light on the bow tips. The moon is now just above the treetops of the distant wood on your right, and its light passes through the bare branches and makes a pattern of pale, moving lines on the dark ground beneath the trees. The branches themselves are black against the moon, a delicate, intricate lacework of twig and limb that seems to hold the moon in place like a jewel in a setting of dark iron. And as the moon moves lower, the branches seem to reach upward to receive it, their tips glowing briefly as the light catches them and then passing into darkness. You find yourself watching the moon's slow descent, with a calm, quiet attention that has no object but the watching itself. And you notice the way the moonlight picks out individual leaves that still cling to the outermost branches, turning each leaf into a tiny, pale hand that catches and holds the light for a moment before the branch moves in the breeze and the leaf twists away into shadow. The breeze is still faint, barely enough to stir the mist around your knees, but it is enough to make the whole dark lacework of the wood tremble slightly, and the trembling makes the pattern of light on the ground shift and dance in a slow, hypnotic rhythm that you could watch for hours without tiring. Behind the wood, the sky has cleared almost entirely, and the stars there are sharp and bright, little points of cold fire that seem close enough to touch, even though you know they are further away than any distance you can imagine. You pick out another pattern, a triangle of 3 bright stars that sits just above the tree line, and you remember that this triangle is part of a larger figure, a figure that some call a swan and others call a cross, its long neck and outstretched wings spanning a great swath of the summer sky. The swan is flying south tonight, toward the unseen horizon, and you watch it go with a sense of quiet companionship, as if the constellation is another traveler sharing this cold, moonlit field with you. The mist has thickened slightly, rising now to the middle of your thighs, and it has begun to flow in slow, sinuous currents that follow the invisible contours of the ground. Where the mist passes over a shallow puddle, it becomes thinner and more transparent, and you can see the reflected moon in the puddle below, a perfect pale circle that shimmers and breaks apart as the mist drifts across it. The reflection reforms when the mist passes, just as perfect as before, and the cycle repeats itself again and again with a patience that matches your own, the moon in the water and the moon in the sky exchanging their silent, silver correspondence. Your neck grows a little stiff from looking upward for so long, and you lower your gaze slowly, letting the blood flow back into the muscles while you look at the nearer world again. The moonlight has reached the sheaf of arrows at your hip, and the leather binding that holds the shafts together gleams with a dull, waxy sheen. The goose feathers at the ends of the arrows are silver-tipped, their edges catching the light in a way that makes them look softer than they really are, and you reach down to touch one of them with your fingertip, feeling the familiar, smooth resistance of the feather veins. The arrow is cold and dry, and you leave it as it is, satisfied with the simple fact of its presence. The line of archers to your left and right has become a line of silvered statues in the moonlight, each man standing in his own small pool of mist, with his bow planted beside him, and his face tilted up toward the sky or down toward the earth, according to his own private inclination. Some of the men have closed their eyes, and their faces are pale and still in the moonlight, their features softened by the silver-grey illumination, until they look like figures carved from old, weathered stone. Others are still watching the sky as you were, and you can see the faint glint of moonlight in their open eyes, a tiny bright point that mirrors the stars above. No one speaks, and the silence that wraps the field is so deep and so complete that the sound of your own breathing seems like an intrusion, a small necessary reminder that you are still alive and still here. The moon has now touched the topmost branches of the wood, and its lower edge is beginning to blur as the first thin wisps of cloud return to veil it. The light is changing as the moon sinks lower, becoming warmer and softer, a pale gold rather than a cold silver, and it paints the mist and the bows and the faces of the men with a gentler, more forgiving hue. The gold is the color of old parchment, of honey stored in a dark jar, of the last embers of a fire that has burned down to its final blow, and it makes the whole field feel less like a place of waiting and more like a place of rest, a quiet dormitory under the vast, watching sky. The stars overhead remain as they were, too high to be affected by the moon's changing color, and they continue to shine with their steady, diamond-white light while the gold creeps upward from the horizon. You watch the boundary between the gold and the silver move slowly across the sky, a soft, unmarked transition that is less a line than a gradient, and you think about how many nights you have seen this same transition, how many dawns and dusks have painted the sky in these same quiet colors. The number is too large to count, and the thought of it is not a thought but a feeling, a deep, calm sense of your own small place in a very large and very patient world. The mist has risen to your waist now, and the boughs planted in the mud are slowly disappearing into it, their lower limbs swallowed by the white, while their upper limbs and tips still catch the moon's gold light. The effect is that of a forest floating on a cloud, a strange and beautiful sight that you've never seen before and may never see again, and you let yourself look at it with a full, unhurried appreciation. The mist moves gently around your body as you stand there, parting around your hips and closing again behind you, and you feel its cool, damp touch through the wool of your tunic, a touch that is neither unpleasant nor pleasant, simply another sensation in the long, slow night. The moon is now half hidden behind the tree line, and its light comes through the branches in long, slanting rays that fan out across the field like the spokes of a great, golden wheel. Each ray illuminates a narrow strip of mist, a line of boughs, a single figure in the line, and then passes on, leaving darkness in its wake, and the whole field is crossed and recrossed by these moving beams of light as the moon sinks lower and lower. You watch one particular beam as it travels slowly toward you from the right, lighting up the ground, the mist, the bow of the man next to you, and then you yourself, and for a moment you're standing in a shaft of pale gold that touches your face and your hands, and the yew wood of your bow with a gentle, luminous warmth that is only light and not heat. Then the beam moves on, and you are in shadow again, and the shadow is just as peaceful as the light was. The moon disappears entirely behind the wood, and the sky loses its gold, returning to the deep, star-filled black that you remember from the hours before the clouds thinned. The stars seem brighter now in the moon's absence, their light sharper and colder, and you can see many more of them than you could before. The fainter stars that had been washed out by the moonlight now emerging to claim their small places in the dark. The Milky Way is brighter too, a broad, luminous river of light that stretches across the entire sky from north to south, and you follow it with your eyes once more, tracing its course from the misty horizon on your left, to the misty horizon on your left, to the misty horizon on your right. A journey that takes a long time and has no destination. The night is now in its deepest, quietest hour, the hour when even the stars seem to hold their breath, and you lower your gaze from the sky to the earth and find the earth still there, still muddy and patient and unchanged. The mist has risen to your chest, and the boughs around you are now nothing more than dark tips poking through a white sea, their strings invisible, their lower limbs lost in the fog. Your own bow is still beside you, still upright, and you touch the smooth, cold yew with the palm of your hand, feeling the familiar grain and the small, worn nick that you made so long ago. The bow is wet with the mist, and your hand comes away damp, but you do not wipe it dry. You simply return it to your side and let the moisture be there. You are standing in a field in France, under a sky full of stars, wrapped in wool and mist, with a bow beside you and arrows at your hip, and the whole world is still and silent and vast. The waiting continues, but it is no longer waiting. It is simply being, a quiet presence in the dark that has no need for mourning or for movement. The stars will fade when the sun comes, and the mist will rise and vanish, and the bows will become bows again, instead of masts in a fog. But for now, everything is as it is, and that is enough. The coldest hour of the night arrives without announcement, the way it always does, seeping up from the ground and down from the sky at the same time until the two coldnesses meet somewhere in the middle of your chest and settle there for a long, motionless stay. You've been aware of the cold all night as a companion and a fact, but in this hour it becomes something more insistent, a deep, thorough chill that reaches into the smallest spaces of your body, the hollows behind your knees, the crooks of your elbows, the thin skin over your cheekbones, the tips of your ears. You do not shiver, because shivering is a kind of action, and you have long since passed beyond the desire for action, but you feel the cold as a slow crystalline presence that has replaced the ordinary warmth of your blood with something heavier and slower. The darkness at this hour is absolute, or nearly so, the moon long since set behind the western wood, and the stars faded to a faint, distant glitter that gives no light at all to the earth below. You cannot see your own hand in front of your face unless you bring it very close, and even then it is only a darker shape against a slightly lighter dark. A ghost of a hand that might belong to you or might not. The mist that rose during the moonlit hours has thickened into a dense cold fog that presses against you from all sides, and you can feel its tiny droplets settling on your eyelashes and on the fine hairs of your forearms, where your sleeves have pulled back just a fraction of an inch. The fog muffles every sound and erases every shape, so that the world has become a small, close pocket of cold air and wet wool, and the steady, quiet rhythm of your own breath. This is the hour when the body most wants to surrender to sleep, and you feel that pull now as a heavy, sweet pressure behind your eyes and along the back of your neck. Your eyelids have grown so heavy that keeping them open requires a small conscious effort, and you have long since stopped making that effort for more than a few moments at a time. You let your eyes close and stay closed, your head tilting forward just slightly until your chin nearly touches your chest, and in this position you drift into a state that is not quite sleep and not quite waking. A borderland where the cold and the dark and the fog become less like physical realities and more like elements of a long, slow dream. Your legs remain locked in place, your feet still planted in the mud, your hands still resting on the bow, and some part of you remains aware of these things, even as the rest of you floats in the quiet, empty space behind your closed eyelids. A long time passes, or perhaps only a short time. You have no way to measure it, and no need to try. When you open your eyes again, something has changed, though the change is so faint and so gradual that you cannot say you witnessed it happening. The darkness is no longer absolute. It has become a very deep grey instead of a pure black, and the grey is slightly lighter in one direction than in all the others, a direction that your body knows without being told is the east. The fog has thinned just enough that you can make out the shape of your own bow standing beside you, a tall dark line against a slightly paler dark, and you can see the curve of your own hand where it rests on the upper limb, the fingers pale and still, like the fingers of a statue. The transition from night to morning is never a single event, but a long series of small, almost imperceptible steps, and you are now somewhere in the middle of that staircase, far enough from midnight to feel the approach of dawn, but still deep enough in darkness that the dawn feels more like a memory of something that once happened than a promise of something to come. The first step has already occurred. The absolute black has become a textured grey. The second step is happening now, as the grey lightens by a fraction and the shapes around you begin to separate themselves from each other. Your bow from the fog from the ground from the distant tree line that is now a thin dark line drawn across the bottom edge of the sky. The cold does not lessen during this slow brightening. If anything, it seems to intensify for a brief while, as if the approaching dawn is pushing a final wave of chill ahead of it like a bow wave before a slow-moving ship. You feel this intensification in your feet most of all, your wet cold toes curling inside your turn shoes in a slow, involuntary response, and you flex them deliberately a few times, feeling the stiffness in the joints and the faint, distant ache that has lived there for so many hours. It has become almost a comfort. The mud around your feet is cooled during the night, until it is nearly the same temperature as the air, and the distinction between ground and atmosphere has blurred, your feet belonging to both and neither. Now the third step of dawn begins, the appearance of the first faint colors. The grey of the eastern sky separates itself into layers, the lowest layer taking on a subtle bluish tint, while the higher layers remain a neutral charcoal grey. The bluish tint is so pale and so delicate that you might be imagining it, but as the minutes pass it deepens just enough to confirm its own reality, a cool, watery blue that reminds you of the color of a winter sky reflected in a half-frozen puddle. Above this blue, the grey is unchanged, and above that, the last few stars are still visible, fading slowly as the sky brightens behind them, their light growing thinner and more tentative until one by one they blink out and do not return. The shape of the man to your left has emerged from the darkness now, a tall, still figure wrapped in a dark tunic, with his bow planted beside him and his head tilted forward in a posture that matches your own. He has not moved since the last time you were aware of him, hours ago, and you cannot tell if he is awake or asleep or somewhere in between, like you were. His shoulders are dusted with a fine layer of frost, pale and sparkling in the growing light, and you notice now that your own shoulders carry the same frost, a thin white crust that has formed on the outer nap of your wool tunic during the coldest part of the night. The frost is beautiful, in a quiet, fleeting way, a lace of tiny ice crystals that will vanish as soon as the first direct light touches them, and you do not brush it off, but let it remain, a temporary decoration that asks nothing of you. Other shapes are appearing now all along the line, the arches emerging from the retreating fog like stones revealed by a falling tide. Each man stands in his own small circle of churned mud, his bow rising beside him, his breath forming small pale clouds that appear and disappear in a slow, steady rhythm. The collective breathing of the line is more visible now than it was in the full dark, the little clouds of vapor rising from hundreds of mouths and nostrils and merging into a thin, diffuse mist that hangs over the formation at head height, a mist made not of the earth's exhalation but of the army's. You watch these breath clouds form and drift and vanish, and the sight is a quiet, hypnotic one that holds your attention for a long time, without requiring anything from you in return. A new sound comes from behind you. The first deliberate sound of human activity that you have heard in many hours, the soft, rhythmic scrape of a blade on a whetstone, a sound that carries through the cold, still air with a surprising clarity. Someone is sharpening a knife or an axe or a stake, working the edge with slow, careful strokes that speak of long practice and no hurry. The scrape pauses, and you imagine the man holding the blade up to the faint light to check its edge, and then the scraping resumes. A little softer now, a little finer, the finishing strokes that turn a sharp edge into a razor. The sound is a companionable one, a reminder that you are not alone in the fog, and you listen to it until it stops for the final time and does not resume. The blue in the eastern sky has spread upward and outward, pushing the grey ahead of it and thinning the last of the high clouds into pale, translucent streaks that catch the first light of a sun that has not yet risen. The streaks are the colour of old ivory or fresh cream, a warm soft white that stands in gentle contrast to the cool blue around them, and they stretch across the sky in long feathered lines that point toward the hidden sunrise like signposts on a road no one can travel. The sight of them is the most beautiful thing you have seen in a long while, and you let it fill your eyes without analysis or comment, simply receiving the colour and the shape and the slow, graceful drift of the clouds as they move across the brightening dome. The man to your right stirs for the first time in what feels like hours, a slow, stiff movement that begins in his shoulders and travels down to his arms and his hips and his legs, a full-body shudder that shakes the frost from his tunic and sends a small shower of ice crystals glittering to the mud. He stamps his feet, once and then again, and the sound is a heavy, wet thud that speaks of numb toes and cold leather, and the simple animal need to feel the ground under you. The stamping is not loud, but in the quiet of the early dawn it carries, and you hear it echoed a moment later by another man further down the line, and then another, a slow, scattered rhythm of stamping feet that moves along the formation like a ragged drumbeat. You stamped your own feet after a moment, not because you feel a strong need to, but because the rhythm invites you to join, and the impact sends a sharp, tingling sensation up through your calves that is half pain and half pleasure. The stamping dies away, and in the silence that follows, you hear a new sound, one that is entirely different from the sounds of the night, the first, tentative note of a bird singing from the direction of the wood on your left. The note is thin and high and a little uncertain, as if the bird is not entirely sure that the dawn has arrived and is testing the air to make certain before committing to a full song. The note hangs in a cold air for a moment and then fades, and for a long while there is nothing else, and you think perhaps the bird has decided to wait a little longer. Then the note comes again, stronger this time, and it is joined by a second note from a different bird, a lower, richer call that answers the first one across the dark space of the field, and the two notes together make a small, bright duet that is over almost as soon as it begins, but leaves behind the sense of something having been accomplished. The light has grown strong enough now that you can see details again, the small individual features of the world that the darkness erased. You can see the grain of the yew wood in your bow, the fine parallel lines of dark and light that run the length of the stave. You can see the weave of your walled tunic, the tiny hills and valleys of the fulled fibers that catch the light in different ways depending on which direction you look. You can see the mud on your turn shoes, the dark, wet leather and the crust of dried silt that has caked around the ankle thongs. You can see the faces of the men nearest to you, their cheeks pale and drawn from the long night, their eyes blinking slowly in the growing light, their expressions blank and calm and very tired. All of these details come back to you, not as revelations but as quiet returns, the world reassembling itself piece by piece while you watch. You become aware of a deep, persistent ache in your stomach, a hollow, empty feeling that has been there for some time, but has only now risen to the level of your conscious attention. You have not eaten since the previous afternoon, a lump of hard bread and a piece of dried meat that you chewed slowly while marching, and your body is beginning to remind you of this fact with a gentle, insistent pressure that is not yet hunger, but will become hunger if you ignore it for much longer. You reach under your tunic, to the small leather pouch that hangs from your belt, the pouch that holds the few hard crumbs of bread left from the day before, and you draw out the largest of these crumbs, a piece roughly the size of a walnut, that is dark and hard and unyielding. The bread in your hand is a survival bread, made from rye and barley and a little ground peas, baked hard so that it will keep for weeks without molding, and it requires a certain amount of patience to eat. You put it into your mouth and let it sit there on your tongue, while your saliva slowly softens the outer layer, and the taste that comes through is faint and a little sour and entirely familiar. You do not chew so much as wait, letting the bread rehydrate at its own pace, and after a long moment you begin to work it gently between your back teeth, breaking it down into smaller and smaller pieces that you swallow one at a time with a slow, careful motion of your throat. The bread is not satisfying in any rich or immediate way, but it fills the hollow in your stomach with a small, warm presence, and that is enough for now. You offer a crumb to the man on your left, not with words, but by holding out your hand with the remaining piece resting on your palm, and he looks at it for a moment before reaching out and taking it with a small, stiff nod. He eats it in the same slow, patient way you ate yours, and neither of you speaks. But the small exchange has happened, and it leaves behind a faint, warm residue of something that is not quite fellowship, but is adjacent to it, a quiet recognition that you are both here and both hungry, and both waiting for whatever comes next. The light continues to grow, and with it comes a subtle shift in the quality of the air, a barely perceptible warming that is more a promise than a reality. The frost on your shoulders has begun to melt, the tiny crystals turning from white to clear, and then to tiny droplets of water that soak into the wool and disappear. The frost on the bows and on the stakes and on the grass is melting too, and the whole field is undergoing a slow, silent transformation from a place of ice and darkness to a place of water and light. A transformation that happens without any fuss or hurry, simply because it is time for it to happen. The fog has retreated now to the lowest parts of the field, a thin white layer that clings to the hollows and the ditches and the distant wood, and above it the world is clear and sharp and very still. The sky directly overhead has turned a pale, clean blue, the kind of blue that belongs to early autumn mornings when the sun is still low and the air is still cold, and the last few streaks of cloud are fading from ivory to white to nothing as the sun approaches the horizon. You can see the line of the distant wood clearly now, every tree distinct, every branch visible, and beyond the wood the countryside stretches away in a patchwork of dark fields and pale hedgerows, and the occasional glint of a stream or a pond catching the first rays of the rising sun. The man who was sharpening his blade has finished, and you hear him blow on the edge to clear away the last of the grit, a soft, breathy sound that carries through the quiet morning. Another man is coughing, a deep wet cough that comes from the chest and lasts for several seconds before subsiding, and you can hear the rattle of phlegm in his throat as he spits into the mud. The cough is not a sound of sickness so much as a sound of mourning, the body clearing itself of the night's accumulated stillness, and it is followed by other morning sounds: the clearing of a throat, the sniff of a nose, the soft groan of a man stretching his back after too many hours of standing still. You stretch your own back now, a slow, careful movement that begins with a forward tilt of your pelvis and travels upward through your spine, vertebrae by vertebrae, until your shoulders pull back and your chest opens and your chin lifts toward the pale sky. The stretch sends a wave of sensation through your tired muscles, a mix of ache and relief that is almost pleasurable in its intensity, and you hold the position for a long moment before releasing it with a slow, controlled exhale. The release feels as good as the stretch, and you stand there for a while afterward, feeling the blood moving through your back and your shoulders and your neck, a warm, tingling flow that is life returning to the places where life had slowed. You look down at your hands, seeing them clearly for the first time since the previous evening. They are pale and a little blue at the nail beds, the skin rough and dry around the knuckles, and the fingertips cracked from the cold and the damp. There is mud under your nails, a dark, fine silt that has worked its way deep into the quick, and there is a small healing cut on the side of your left index finger, a cut you do not remember receiving. You rub your hands together slowly, feeling the friction warm the skin, and then you tuck them under your arms for a moment, pressing them against the warmer wall of your sides while you look out across the brightening field. The field has not changed in any significant way since you last saw it clearly, but the new light gives it a different character, a different mood. The mud is still there, dark and wet and patient. The puddles are still there, reflecting the blue sky now instead of the grey one, their surfaces ruffled by the faintest breeze. The distant woods are still there, their bare branches etched against the pale sky with a clarity that seems almost artificial, as if someone has drawn them there with a very fine pen. And the stakes are still there, the sharpened wooden stakes that were planted in the ground before the light failed yesterday, their points gleaming faintly with moisture, and their bases sunk deep in the mud, where they will stay until someone pulls them free. You feel the weight of the day to come settle over you like a blanket, not a threat, but a fact, a simple, inevitable presence that you accept as you have accepted everything else in the long, slow hours of the night. The waiting is not over, but it has entered a new phase, a phase of light and clarity and the gradual return of small, purposeful movements. Somewhere in the camp behind you, a fire is being rekindled, and you can smell the sharp, clean scent of wood smoke drifting through the cold air. Somewhere to your front, on the far side of the field, the French army is also waking, also stretching, also checking its equipment and stamping its feet in the cold mud. The thought of them is a distant, abstract one, a thought without emotion or urgency, simply an acknowledgement that there are other men, other bows, other stakes on the far side of this same wet ground. The sun breaks the horizon at last, a thin golden line that appears above the distant wood and sends long horizontal rays of light skimming across the field. The light catches the tips of the stakes and the upper limbs of the bows and the faces of the men, turning everything it touches to a warm, soft gold that is the color of honey and old wood and autumn leaves. The warmth of the light is not yet strong enough to feel on your skin, but you can see it, and the seeing of it is a kind of warmth in itself, a promise that the cold will not last forever, and that the world is still turning in its slow, patient way. You close your eyes for a moment and turn your face toward the sun, letting the light press against your eyelids, and the darkness behind your lids is a warm, reddish orange that reminds you of firelight and hearths in the interior of your own small house on a winter evening. The light is a comfort, a small, steady gift after the long, dark hours, and you accept it without thought or gratitude, simply letting it be there, letting it warm your closed eyes and your chilled cheeks and the cold tip of your nose. The day has come, and you are still here, still standing, still patient, and that is all that matters for now. The order comes not as a shouted command, but as a low murmur that travels along the line from somewhere far to your right, passed from mouth to mouth like a cup of water being handed through a crowd. By the time it reaches the man next to you, it is barely more than a whisper, a few quiet words spoken into the cold morning air, and he turns his head just enough to pass them on to you, form the line, plant the stakes. The words do not hurry you, and you do not feel hurried by them. They are simply the next thing to do, the next small task in a long sequence of small tasks that began when you first stood up in the dark and will not end until you lie down again. The movement that follows the order is slow and scattered at first, a general stirring along the length of the archer's position that looks more like a field of wheat beginning to sway in a light breeze than an army preparing for anything. Many who have been standing still for hours begin to shift their weight and lift their feet from the mud with wet, sucking sounds that are no longer separate events, but a continuous, soft chorus of squelches and releases. You lift your own feet now, one and then the other, feeling the mud's grip loosen and then let go. And the sensation is strange after so long in one position, a sudden lightness in your legs that makes you feel almost unsteady for a moment, until your body remembers how to move. You reach down and take hold of your bow, pulling the lower tip free from the mud where it has been planted all night. The wood comes up with a faint, wet pop, and the lower 6 inches of the stave are dark with moisture, the yew stained a deep, rich brown that is almost black. You wipe the tip with the palm of your hand, smearing away the worst of the mud, and then you rest the bow over your left shoulder in the carrying position you learned as a boy, the string across your chest and the upper limb pointing back and up at a slight angle. The weight of the bow settles across your shoulder with a familiar, reassuring pressure, and you are ready to move. Around you, the line is transforming slowly from a static row of planted bows and still figures into a fluid, shifting formation of men finding their proper places. The movement is not a march or a charge, but a slow, deliberate drift, each man stepping carefully through the mud and adjusting his position in relation to the men on either side. You can see the archers to your left and right doing the same thing you were doing, their heads turning to gauge distances, their feet finding new patches of ground that are slightly higher or slightly firmer than the ones they are leaving. No one speaks above a low murmur, and no one gestures with any urgency. The entire formation is adjusting itself with the quiet, patient coordination of a flock of birds settling into a tree. You find your own place about 10 paces to the left of where you stood all night, a patch of ground that is slightly raised above the surrounding mud and covered with a thin mat of flattened grass. The grass is dead and brown, but it provides a firmer footing than the bare earth, and you stamp your feet a few times to test the ground's solidity before deciding that this will be your position for the next phase of the waiting. The man on your left has found his place as well, and the man on your right is still adjusting, taking a half step forward and then a half step back before settling with a final, satisfied grunt. The three of you now stand in a line that is not perfectly straight, but close enough, and the line extends on either side for as far as you can see, a long, gentle curve of archers facing the open field. The stakes are the next concern, the sharpened wooden stakes that each archer carries and plants in front of his position to break the charge of horses, should they ever come. Your stake is lying on the ground a few paces behind you, where you left it yesterday evening before the light failed, and you walk back to retrieve it now, stepping carefully over the churned mud and the scattered equipment of the men behind you. The stake is a length of ash wood, about as long as your arm and as thick as your wrist, with one end sharpened to a point and the other end left blunt and square. The wood is pale and smooth, the bark stripped away long ago, and the point has been hardened in a fire until it is black and dense and slightly glossy. You pick up the stake with both hands, feeling its weight and its balance, and then you carry it back to your new position, holding it across your body like a staff. Planting the stake is a simple task, one you have done many times before, but it requires a certain amount of care and a certain amount of patience. The ground must be soft enough to accept the point, but firm enough to hold the stake upright once it is planted, and you must find the right angle, the right depth, the right distance from your own feet. You begin by choosing the exact spot, a point about 3 paces in front of where you will stand, and you drive the sharpened tip into the mud with a single firm thrust that sinks the point several inches deep. The mud gives way easily, too easily perhaps, and you work the stake back and forth a few times to widen the hole before pulling it out again and moving a half step to the left, where the ground feels slightly denser and more resistant. You try the new spot with another thrust, and this time the stake holds more firmly, the point biting into the clay beneath the mud and standing upright with only a slight wobble. The angle of the stake is important. It must lean forward toward the enemy so that a charging horse will run onto the point at the height of its chest rather than simply pushing the stake aside. You tilt the stake now, adjusting it so that the point is aimed at the height of a man's waist and the blunt end is braced against the ground behind it, and you test the angle by sighting along the shaft from several different positions. the angle is correct or close enough, and you drive the stake deeper with several short, sharp blows from the heel of your hand, feeling the wood shiver with each impact and the point bite deeper into the clay. The stake settles into its final position with a solid, unmoving firmness, and you give it one last push to make sure before turning your attention back to your own position. Some of the archers are using wooden mallets to drive their stakes, and you can hear the dull, rhythmic thudding of mallet on wood coming from further down the line. The sound is a slow, patient beat. 2 or 3 strikes and then a pause while the archer checks his work. 2 or 3 more strikes and another pause, and it carries through the cold morning air with a muffled, percussive quality that reminds you of a distant drum being played for no audience but the fog. The mallet work is unhurried, each man taking his own time and working at his own pace, and the scattered thudding continues for a long while as the line of stakes grows along the front of the archer's position. You return to your own stake and check it again, grasping it with both hands and pulling hard to see if it will come loose. It does not budge, and the point is deep in the clay now, the wood firm and steady. You nod to yourself, a small, private acknowledgement of a task completed, and then you turn around and walk back to your position, stepping carefully around the stake and measuring the distance from it to the place where you will stand. 3 paces, more or less, enough room to step forward and plant your feet before raising your bow, and you test this distance by walking through the motion slowly, once and then again, feeling the ground under your feet and the space around your body and the relationship between where you stand and where the stake is planted. The line of stakes is now a visible feature of the field, a long, irregular hedge of sharpened points that runs parallel to the archer's formation and leans outward at a uniform angle. From a distance, the stakes must look like a strange, leafless hedge, a barrier of pale wood and dark points that has grown up overnight in the middle of the French countryside. The sight of them is a comforting one, not because they represent violence, but because they represent order, a clear, simple boundary between where you are and where you are not, between waiting and whatever comes after waiting. You look along the line of stakes as far as you can see, noting the small variations in height and angle and spacing, the individual choices made by individual men, and the overall effect is of a collective effort that needed no coordination beyond the shared knowledge of what must be done. You return to your bow now, which you leaned against your shoulder while you worked on the stake, and you plant it upright in the mud beside your new position, pressing the lower tip firmly into the ground until it stands on its own. The bow settles into its new spot with the same quiet patience it showed in the old one, and you rest your hand on the upper limb in the familiar way, feeling the damp hue and the faint grain and the small, worn nick that you know so well. The sheaf of arrows at your hip has shifted during your movements, and you reach down to adjust it, pulling the leather strap tighter and settling the bundle more securely against your side. The arrows rattle softly as they resettle, a sound that is both familiar and reassuring, and then they are still. Around you, the other archers are finishing their own preparations, the last few stakes being driven home with final, decisive thuds, the last few positions being adjusted and readjusted. The low murmur of voices continues. Quiet words pass between neighbors about the firmness of the ground or the angle of a stake or the condition of a bowstring, and the morning air carries these quiet exchanges without amplifying them, holding them close to the ground like a parent holding a sleeping child. The fog has almost entirely burned off now, only a few thin wisps remaining in the lowest hollows, and the sun is fully above the tree line, a pale gold disk that is beginning to carry the first faint promise of warmth. You stand in your new position and look out across the open field, the same field you've been watching for so many hours, and you see it now from a slightly different angle and a slightly different perspective. The ground still slopes gently downward to the flat, open strip between the two woods, and the puddles still reflect the pale blue sky, and the distant tree line still stands dark and still against the morning light. Nothing has changed, and yet everything feels slightly different because you have moved, because you have done something with your hands and your body, because the long passive wait of the night has given way to a different kind of waiting, a waiting that is alert and prepared and ready. The man to your left has finished his preparations and is now standing as still as you are, his bow planted, his stake driven, his arrows checked. He looks at you for a moment, a brief neutral glance that carries no particular message, and then he looks away again, out across the field. The man to your right does the same, and you do the same, and the three of you are now part of a long, patient arc of men and bows and stakes that faces the empty ground where nothing has happened yet, and where nothing may happen for a long time still. The formation in the mire is complete, or as complete as it needs to be. The archers are in position, the stakes are planted, the bows are ready, and the morning sun is climbing slowly into the pale autumn sky, casting long shadows that stretch out behind you toward the west. The field is quiet again, the sounds of preparation fading into the background, and the stillness that settles over the line is the same deep, patient stillness that held you all night, a stillness that asks nothing and promises nothing and simply is. You take a slow breath and let it out, feeling the cool air enter and leave your lungs, and then you settle into the weight once more, as patient and as still as the stakes you have just planted. The first drop lands on the crown of your head with a touch so light that you mistake it for a fading memory of the mist, a single cold point that vanishes into your hair and leaves behind only the faintest trace of moisture. You do not look up, because there is no reason to look up. The sky has been grey for so many hours that a drop of rain is not a surprise, but a return, a familiar visitor coming back to sit beside you for a while. The second drop lands on the back of your left hand while it rests on the upper limb of your bow, and this time you see it. A small dark circle of water that spreads slightly into the wool of your sleeve before the fibers absorb it and the circle disappears. The third drop lands on the mud near your foot, making a tiny crater that fills with water and then slowly levels out, and by the time the fourth and fifth drops arrive, you have accepted that the rain has returned, and you settle into its presence with the same quiet patience you have given to everything else. The rain is not the heavy driving rain of a storm, but a fine, gentle drizzle that seems to hang in the air as much as fall through it. Each drop small and separate and slow, descending at a slight angle from the low grey clouds that have moved in from the west while you were busy with the stakes. The clouds are the same colour as the wool of your tunic, a deep, neutral grey that holds no threat and no promise, and they have filled the sky from horizon to horizon, erasing the pale blue of the early morning and returning the world to the muted, monochrome palette of the day before. The sun is still there somewhere above the clouds, and you can see the faint, diffuse brightness of its position as a lighter patch of grey that moves slowly across the sky, but the direct light is gone, and the shadows have faded, and the whole field has taken on the soft, shadowless quality of a room lit by a single window on a wet afternoon. The sound of the rain is the first thing you notice after the feel of it, a soft, steady hiss that rises from the mud and the grass and the stakes and the wool of your own clothing, a sound that is not loud but is everywhere at once, surrounding you from all sides with a gentle, shushing whisper. The hiss is made of 1,000 tiny impacts, each drop striking a different surface with a slightly different tone. The deeper, wetter sound of rain on mud, the sharper, brighter sound of rain on the wooden stakes, the muffled, fabric-soft sound of rain on wall, the faint, metallic ping of rain on the iron points of the arrows in your sheath. All of these sounds blend together into a single, continuous wash of white noise that fills your ears and seems to fill your head as well, pushing out the last remnants of thought and leaving only the simple, physical fact of the rain. You close your eyes, not because you are tired, but because closing your eyes seems like the right thing to do in the rain, the natural response to a world that has become sound and touch rather than sight. The dark mist behind your eyelids is the same warm, reddish grey it has always been, but now it is accompanied by the soft, percussive rhythm of the raindrops on your face, each one a tiny, cold kiss that lands on your forehead or your cheek or the bridge of your nose, and then runs slowly down your skin, tracing the contours of your features before dripping from your chin or your jaw or the tip of your nose. The paths the droplets take are different each time, small, wandering journeys down the landscape of your face, and you follow them with your attention without moving or responding, simply feeling the cool, wet lines they draw on your skin. The rain soaks into your hair slowly, working its way through the thick, tangled strands until your scalp is cool and wet, and the water begins to run down the back of your neck in a thin, steady trickle. The trickle follows the line of your spine, a single, cold finger that traces your vertebrae one by one before disappearing into the collar of your tunic, where the wool absorbs it and spreads it out into a general, cooling dampness. The collar of your tunic is already wet now, the wool dark and heavy with absorbed water, and it clings to your throat with a close, cool pressure that is not uncomfortable but simply present, another layer of sensation in a world that has become all sensation. The wool of your tunic is changing under the rain, the outer nap becoming darker and heavier as the water works its way into the fibers, and you can feel the weight of the garment increasing slowly, pulling down on your shoulders with a gentle, insistent gravity. The rain has not yet soaked through to the gambeson beneath, and you can still feel the relative dryness of the padded linen against your chest and back, a small warm core of comfort that you know will not last forever, but will last for a while, yet. The boundary between the wet wool and the dry linen is a distinct tactile line that you can feel with every breath, your chest expanding against the damp outer layer and the dry inner layer at the same time. A quiet reminder of the difference between inside and outside. Your hands are wet now, the skin glistening with a fine layer of moisture that beads on the backs of your knuckles and runs down between your fingers. You lift one hand and look at it through half-closed eyes, seeing the way the water catches the diffuse grey light and makes your skin look pale and smooth and slightly unreal. A hand that belongs to someone else or to no one at all. You turn the hand over slowly, watching the raindrops fall on your palm and pool there in the shallow cup of your lifeline. A tiny reservoir of cold water that overflows and runs down your wrist and under the cuff of your sleeve. The sensation is cool and clean and entirely absorbing, and you hold your hand out for a long moment, letting the rain fill it and empty it, and fill it again. The bow beside you is wet now. The yew were dark and slick with moisture, and the wax string gleams with a thin, wet sheen that catches the light in a single silver line. Drops of water are forming on the string at regular intervals, each one hanging from the waxed linen like a tiny, clear bead. And as you watch, one of the beads grows too heavy and slides down the string in a slow, trembling descent before falling to the mud below. Another bead forms in its place almost immediately, and the cycle repeats itself, a slow, patient rhythm of accumulation and release that has no end and no beginning. The horn knocks at the tips of the bow are wet too, the pale horn darkening to a warm honey color that stands out against the darker yew, and water drips from the upper knock in a steady, slow cadence that matches the dripping from the leaves of the distant wood. The arrows in your sheath are protected from the worst of the rain by the leather binding and by the angle at which they hang against your hip. But the feathered ends are beginning to show the effects of the damp, the goose feathers clumping slightly, and the fine, individual barbs sticking together in small wet clusters. You know that you will need to dry them carefully when the rain stops, spreading each feather between your fingers and working the moisture out with a slow, gentle pressure. But that is a task for later, a task that belongs to a different version of yourself than the one standing here in the rain. For now, the arrows are wet, and that is all right, and you let them be wet without worrying about what comes next. The mud around your feet is changing under the rain, the surface becoming slicker and more liquid, the small ridges and hollows that your feet have made over the long hours slowly filling in and smoothing over. The water is pooling on the surface now, a thin brown layer that covers the mud like a skin, and when you shift your weight, the water ripples outward in slow, concentric rings that spread and fade and disappear. The mud itself is softer than it was, less able to hold a shape, and your feet have sunk a little deeper, the wet earth now reaching above your ankles and closing around your lower calves with a cold, sucking grip. You do not try to pull free, because there is nowhere to go and no reason to go there. You simply stand in the deepening mud and let it hold you, a patient anchor in a world of water. The rain is falling harder now, or perhaps it only seems harder because you have been standing in it for so long that the accumulation has begun to outweigh the individual drops. The hiss has become a steady, rushing sound that fills the air and makes it difficult to hear anything else. And the other sounds of the camp have faded into the background. The low murmur of voices and the clink of metal and the stamp of feet, all swallowed by the vast, soft noise of the rain. You can barely hear the man next to you, and he can barely hear you, and this mutual deafness creates a strange, private intimacy, each man wrapped in his own cocoon of sound and water, alone together in the downpour. You open your eyes again and look out across the field, but the field is no longer the clear, sharp landscape of the early morning. The rain has drawn a veil across the world, a shifting silver curtain that blurs the distant wood and the far side of the open ground and the line of the horizon, reducing everything beyond 100 paces to a soft grey suggestion of shape and movement. The stakes in front of you are visible only as a row of dark, wet lines that lean forward into the rain, their points glistening with moisture, and the arches to your left and right are visible only as huddled, patient shapes, their bows standing beside them like thin, bare trees in a winter fog. The world has shrunk again, as it shrank in the darkness of the night, but this time the shrinking is a comfort rather than a challenge, a closing in of the universe to a small, manageable circle of rain and mud and wool and wood. The smell of the rain is the next thing you notice, a clean, fresh scent that rises from the wet earth and the wet grass and the wet wool of your own clothing, a scent that is cool and slightly mineral and entirely pleasant. Beneath the freshness is the deeper, richer smell of the mud itself, a dark, organic smell that speaks of old leaves and slow decay and the patient, invisible work of worms and beetles and the tiny, countless creatures that live in the soil. The two smells blend together into a single, complex fragrance that fills your nose and the back of your throat with every slow breath, and you breathe it in deeply, letting it settle in your lungs like a cool, clean drink. You tilt your head back and let the rain fall directly on your face, a gentle, steady shower of cold drops that land on your closed eyelids and your cheeks and your lips, and you open your mouth slightly to catch one of the drops on your tongue. The water tastes of nothing but water, clean and cold and slightly metallic, the taste of rain that has fallen through a long, empty sky without touching anything until it touched you, and you swallow it slowly, feeling the coolness travel down your throat and into your chest. The act of drinking the rain feels like a small, private communion, a sharing of something between yourself and the sky, and you hold the feeling for a moment before lowering your head and opening your eyes to the grey, wet world again. The rain has soaked through your tunic now, and you can feel the dampness spreading across your shoulders and down your back, the wool heavy and cold against your skin. The gambeson beneath is still holding out, but you can feel the moisture beginning to work its way through the outer layers of linen, a slow, patient seepage that will eventually reach your skin and join the dampness of the linen shirt beneath. When that happens, you will be wet through entirely, every layer of clothing saturated with the same cool, clean water, and the distinction between your body and the rain will blur and fade until you are simply a part of the wet world, a living creature made of water and wool and patience. The man to your left shifts his weight, and you hear the squelch of his feet in the mud, even through the sound of the rain, a deep, wet sound that is becoming as familiar as your own breathing. He says something to you, a single word that might be a comment on the rain, or a question about the time, or a name that means nothing to you, but the rain carries the word away before it reaches your ears, and you do not ask him to repeat it. He does not seem to expect a response, and he turns his face back toward the field, his shoulders hunched slightly against the rain, his bow planted beside him, his patience as deep and steady as your own. You think about the fire that will be lit when the rain stops, the small crackling flame that will rise from dry wood and dry tinder, and you think about the warmth that will